Chapter 80. That's because there's only a small pier here. Buckos was so angry that his chest heaved up and down. He had noticed it earlier, but when he was almost done with the market, he finally understood. The variety of goods sold here was not what the mercenaries needed, but what the merchants and the surrounding residents needed. No matter how wide the Krati River was, it was not as wide as the sea. When there were too many merchant ships, they needed to wait for a long time to enter the port of Turai. But now, the mercenaries had directly built a market near the coast. Once the ships arrived at the pier on the coast, they could unload their cargo. To enter the market, one only needed an opal. Having one was equivalent to not having one, and there was no need to pay taxes. As for the buyers, Tullage was not far from here. There were a large number of sailors, fishermen, and so on. They were mainly free people, not citizens of Tullage. They were willing to take a few more steps to buy goods that were cheaper than in the Tullage market, because they did not have to pay taxes, so it was cheaper. Moreover, there were merchants from various cities who were attracted by the exotic atmosphere of the mercenaries selling goods. Seeing Marigi lowering his head and accepting the criticism, Buckos was indignant, but he did not want to say more. "Well, I'll tell divers about it. You can't make the decision, you're just a slave of Persia." Marigi trembled when he heard this. He almost cursed, "You're the slave of Persia. Your whole family are slaves of Persia. You Greek barbarian, are you blind? I used to be a merchant for the royal family of Persia." Fortunately, he managed to hold it in. He did not want to say more and fell behind Buckos and the rest. As they approached the west gate of the market, Buckos noticed that there was an area separated by a mud wall that was half the height of a person. There was a large wooden hut inside, and compared to the noisy stalls in front, it was quieter. There was a long queue at the entrance. "This is?" Buckos asked doubtfully. Although Marigi was cursing in his heart, he had to explain for the sake of publicity. "This is a clinic. Our military doctors have been learning from the Devers for a long time. Their medical skills are superb. Many Turai citizens who have been sick for a long time have improved after their treatment, so they are very popular now. Often at dusk, when the market is about to close, the patients are still unwilling to leave." "So powerful?" Buckos was a little surprised. Moraz whispered in his ear, "Master, you can come here to have a look at the old lady's illness. Maybe they really have a way to cure her." Buckos looked at the long line in front of the shack and nodded. He suddenly thought of something and asked, "You said that these doctors learned their medical skills from Devers? Devers can treat illnesses?" "Of course. The leader is blessed by Hades, so of course he knows the secret of the disease that can bring death to people," Marigi said proudly. Buckos was non-committal. After leaving the market and bidding farewell to Marigi, Moraz asked, "Master, are there really people in this world who are good at commanding battles, good at doing business, and can cure illnesses? Devers, aren't they?" "He is also a god's chosen of Hades," Buckos said indifferently. A few hundred meters to the west, the camp of the Devers came into view. Rather than calling it a camp, it would be more accurate to call it a barrack. There was a trench 3 meters wide and 3 meters deep, a 3-meter-high wall of earth, and a 2-meter-high wooden fence for protection. Behind the wooden wall, sentries could be seen patrolling, so it could be deduced that there was a walkway in the wooden wall. There were many watchtowers inside the wall, which were 6 meters high, overlooking the trench and the blind spots under the wooden wall. There was a wooden door in the middle of the wooden wall, and a simple gate tower was built on top of it. Buckos and Moraz carefully walked along the straight road in front of the camp, because there were a few big wooden signs by the side of the road. "Trap, please take the main road." Moraz observed the faint metallic luster reflected in the weeds that were half a man's height, and guessed what traps there might be. He sighed and said, "Master, the defensive facilities of our tourists don't seem to be as complicated as this." Buckos was a little gloomy. He had been worried about one problem. The mercenaries had built this place like a city. What would the people of Crotone think? The guards at the camp gate asked for the purpose of their visit, and immediately sent someone in to report. Not long after, assistants came out and led the two in. The weeds and rubble in the camp had been cleared away, and the ground was flat and clean. Behind the wooden wall, there was indeed a wooden walkway, so that the wooden wall beyond the walkway was just enough to block the chest area of the soldiers, and there were several wide wooden ladders that could be used to go up the walkway. The tents were set up in an orderly manner, and there was a very wide space between the tents and the wooden wall. There was a wide passageway between the tents and the wooden wall, and there was actually a circular wooden fence built in the middle of the camp. Seeing that Buckos was puzzled, assistants explained, inside is usually the supply camp, the medical camp, and the encampment of the leaders and officers. When the battle starts, once the outer perimeter is breached by the enemy, we can retreat inside and continue to defend. This is the most complicated and well-thought-out military camp I've ever seen. Even though he had some opinions about the mercenaries, Buckos could not help but sigh at this moment. Assistants smiled contentedly and said, "The Devers leader said that this is only the most basic construction of the camp. We don't need anything more complicated yet." He said, "There is no such thing as victory without defeat in war. A strong camp can provide protection for the soldiers in the event of defeat, reduce casualties, and boost morale. So no matter how hard it is, we must be patient and careful to build it well. Sweat more in peacetime, and you will bleed less in wartime. Sweat more in peacetime, and you will bleed less in wartime." Buckos murmured these two sentences. He suddenly realized that he was about to meet a mercenary leader who had a lot of experience in war. The tourist generals did not discuss this with the Devers, but made a plan in advance and asked him to follow it. Was this appropriate? At this moment, Moraz asked doubtfully, "Why? Why are there only a few soldiers in the camp?" "Our brothers are participating in a tug-of-war competition in the back." Tug-of-war? Both of them were curious when they heard this unfamiliar term. In fact, there were already loud shouts coming from the front. Assistants simply led the two of them around the circular wooden fence in the center and walked forward into a wide field. What appeared in front of them was a dense crowd of people. Thousands of soldiers formed 5 or 6 large circles. Each of the soldiers was flushed with excitement, and they clenched their fists and shouted toward the circle. "First Company, Second Team, go! 5th Company, 4th Team, go! 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 Try harder! Oh, we won!" Buckos had only seen such a lively and exciting scene in sport. He had not seen it in action yet, but just listening to the shouts was enough to make his blood boil. Assistants could tell what the two of them were thinking. He deliberately squeezed into a circle and let the two of them in to watch, while he went to call the leader. On the ground in the center of the circle was a rope that was at least 40 meters long. It was probably made up of several ship cables and was as thick as a fist. At this moment, someone in the center shouted, "Next round, 2nd Company 3rd Team vs 7th Company 1st Team. Both sides please enter." Soon, more than 100 strong men entered the circle. After the person confirmed the number of people and names, he said, "Both sides, please get ready." Thus, both sides picked up the rope. Only then did Buckos realize that there was a red rope tied to the center of the rope. There was a heavy object hanging from the end of the rope that pointed to a white line on the ground. There were also white lines on both sides of this white line. The person that Buckos thought was similar to a sports referee loudly announced, "Begin." The 100-strong men on both sides pulled the ropes with all their might. The cheers and cheers from the surroundings also sounded like a tsunami. The red rope swayed left and right continuously. After a stalemate for a period of time, it moved significantly to the left, and the cheers reached their peak. Finally, the red rope reached the white line on the left. The referee waved his hand to signal, "The match is over." Cheers and sighs sounded at the same time. Chapter 81. Long time no see, Buckos. I thought you'd forgotten about your old friend. The Devers greeted him with a smile. How could I have forgotten? It's just that I had a lot of things to deal with after I came back, so I couldn't find the time, Buckos explained. Oh, so you're finally done? The Devers joked. Not yet, Buckos said with a straight face. Buckos said sternly, however, the Turii City Hall has an important order for me to convey to you. Oh, what's the important order? The lords of Tulii have finally remembered us mercenaries, Divers said in a mocking tone. Do you want me to say it here? Buckos glanced around. I'm sorry, it's my oversight. Let's go to my tent. The Devers expressed his apology as he led them to the center of the camp. Did you learn this game of tug-of-war from Persia? Buckos asked. That's what I thought. I'm mainly worried that the soldiers would have nothing to do if they stayed in the camp for too long, and accidents might happen. Therefore, I let them participate in a sports competition. It can not only exhaust their energy, but it can also train their bodies and cultivate teamwork. In fact, there's a reward for the champion of this competition. I've paid quite a lot of money myself. You've managed these mercenaries very well. Buckos praised, then changed the topic. But you don't have to worry anymore. You'll have something to do soon. The Devers were not surprised. The Lucanians are already right in front of us. If the tourists don't do anything, I thought you're ready to give up the land outside the city to them. Buckos could hear the resentment in the Devers' words. He was thinking about how to respond when he caught a glimpse of a 4-meter-tall stone wall inside the wooden wall on the right. He said in surprise, You're going to build another stone wall? The Devers blinked. The ground of that wooden wall is damp, so it's not strong enough. So, we used the waste stones to build another stone wall inside to prevent it from being broken. You and your soldiers are really amazing. You actually built a city out of the camp. Buckos vaguely criticized. There's nothing we can do. We don't have enough people. If we don't build a sturdy camp, we'll have our mercenaries to rescue us if we're surrounded. Who's going to rescue us if we're surrounded? So, you have to rely on yourself for everything, Devers said calmly. Then the market outside is also related to the camp's defense? Buckos asked. At first, I just wanted to rely on the market to buy and sell some things to satisfy my daily needs. I didn't expect things to turn out like this. But don't worry, once the Lucarians are defeated, everything will return to normal. Devers assured him. Buckos only wanted to gain some psychological advantage in the following conversation. After all, only the city hall and the council could decide whether or not to force the mercenaries to close the market. Thus, he did not pursue the matter further and decided to report it to Felix. After entering the Devers' tent, he said, According to our investigation, the Lucanians might attack Turii in 2 days. After a discussion, the generals have decided to face the enemy head-on. They want you to participate in the battle when the time comes. Tell me, what's the Turii general's plan? Devers asked sarcastically. In fact, he felt very helpless. As a participant of a great battle, he did not even have the right to participate in the discussion before the battle. It was really strange. He did not know that the Greek mercenaries were like this when they were under Cyrus the Younger's command. However, at that time, the mercenaries made up half of the total number of mercenaries and were very strong. Cyrus the Younger relied heavily on them. Furthermore, he had lied to the mercenaries beforehand and concealed the fact that he was rebelling. Therefore, whenever he had any excessive requests, he would discuss it with Crocus and the others. When the Devers transmigrated, Cyrus the Younger had already died in battle, so everything was decided by the mercenaries themselves. Now, the Devers once again experienced the terrible feeling of having everything decided by others when they first arrived in this world. Buckos was also very helpless. In fact, Felix had suggested to let the mercenary leaders participate in the discussion and planning of the battle, but Cunigarata and the others firmly refused, saying that they wanted to prevent something like Dionysius's incident from happening again. Dionysius was the current overlord of Syracuse. He had been led by the people to oust him from power by the Democrat. Later, he secretly lured the mercenaries into the city and brutally suppressed the Democrats, thus stabilizing his position as the dictator of Syracuse. Hiring the mercenaries was Felix's suggestion. The generals discussed it and the council approved it. Buckos was then recommended by Felix, so he could only avoid arousing suspicion. According to the scouts, the Lucanians have more than 10,000 people. On our side, you have more than 2,000 soldiers. Draco's has more than 2,000, Tarantum's reinforcements have more than 1,000, Turris can send 4,000, and we have 200 cavalrymen. In total, we have close to 10,000 people. After Buckos finished introducing the military strength of both sides, he picked up a branch and gestured on the ground. The general's plan is that Tarantum's reinforcements will be on the right flank. Since they have the fewest troops, Adriank's and Cesta's 1,000 men will be added to it. The center will be our Turris troops. Due to the previous failure, the number of young Turris has been greatly reduced. So, more than half of the 4,000 men will be citizens over the age of 40, so Draco's 1,000 men will be added to the center. Since your troops are the most experienced and the strongest, your troops will be in charge of the left flank, along with 100 cavalrymen. Another 100 Tarantum cavalrymen will be added to the right flank. Of course, this is only the plan. When it comes to the battlefield, there may be changes based on the enemy's situation. After Buckos finished, he stared at the Devers' expression. The Devers rested his chin on one hand and looked at the pattern on the ground, deep in thought. He did not speak for a long time. Buckos began to feel nervous. "Do you want to hear my opinion?" The Devers raised his head and pointed at the sketch on the ground. With a calm expression, he said, "The allocation of troops given by Turris should be more balanced. Obviously, the generals want to use our defense to wear down the enemy's attack through a prolonged confrontation." Buckos nodded. Felix had said something similar when he explained to him why the formation was arranged this way. The Devers lived up to his reputation. Just by looking at the sketch, he could speculate the general's intentions. "Although I have not fought with the Lucanians, I have fought with many mountain tribes in Persia. Their combat characteristics should be similar. They are fierce, loosely organized, and poorly equipped. Perhaps this is the reason why your generals dared to use this kind of formation, even though they were outnumbered. However, there are a few issues that I need to remind your generals of." The Devers changed the topic and raised his voice. "Last year, the Turris lost more than 10,000 men in the battle against the Lucanians. This means that nearly 10,000 sets of high-quality Greek heavy armor fell into the hands of the Lucanians. They can use it to upgrade their crude equipment. I encountered such a situation when I was scouting in Amendola. Secondly, according to my scouts, the Lucanians have at least 13,000 men, which is more than 3,000 more than us. This means that their formation will be thicker and longer than ours. Not only will they be able to charge and push harder, but they will also be more threatening to flank us. Furthermore, they have just won a huge battle, so their morale will be high when they face us. According to my observations, you Turris are afraid of the Lucanians, so it is hard to say who will be the first to retreat after a long battle." The Devers pointed at the pattern on the ground that represented the middle Turris. "Don't forget, half of them are old men." Buckos' confidence that the Greek heavy infantry would not fear the barbarians in a head-on battle was shaken by the Devers' words. Chapter 82. "Please speak," Buckos said hurriedly. "I will be on the left flank, Tarantum on the right, and Turii in the middle. This order will not change. However, send the 2,000 mercenaries and 200 cavalrymen under Adriank's, Adela's, and Cesta to the left flank under my command. I will lead over 4,000 infantrymen and 200 cavalrymen to defeat the enemy's right flank in the shortest time possible. Then, we will coordinate with the middle to attack the enemy's middle. Obtaining victory is only a matter of time." Devers said confidently. Are you sure you can defeat the enemy in the shortest time possible with these 2,000 mercenaries and 200 cavalrymen under your command? Buckos asked, slightly tempted. There are too many unexpected factors in the battle. I can't be sure before the battle is officially started. However, in my opinion, this plan has a much higher chance of winning than the one you gave us. Devers tried his best to convince Buckos. Buckos was silent for a long time before saying in a low voice, but in the hearts of the generals, their plan has a higher chance of succeeding. In any case, I will report your suggestion to General Felix and let the General's Executive Committee decide whether to adopt it or not. Devers understood the hidden meaning in Buckos' words, and a trace of disappointment appeared on his face. However, he quickly pulled himself together. If you can't give me 2,000 mercenaries, you can at least give me 200 cavalrymen, right? Buckos shook his head. It's a military tradition to divide the cavalry into 2 flanks. You should know this better than me. Furthermore, 100 of them are from Tarentum. They won't abandon their compatriots and run to your left flank. Devers had no other choice. He thought for a moment and said, How strong are the reinforcements from Tarentum? They should be very strong. Archita has led them to defeat the Masapi twice. The Masapi are a race as strong as the Lucanian people, Buckos said with certainty. Archita. Devers repeated the name and said resolutely, In that case, send these 200 cavalrymen to the right flank. Are you sure you aren't just saying that out of anger? Buckos asked in surprise. To me, war is the most important matter that determines the rise and fall of a city and the fate of countless people. Thus, even though I wasn't closely related to this war, I was fully immersed in it, without a shred of selfishness or carelessness. However, the same could not be said for the Turan generals. Did they understand the composition of the Lucanian coalition forces in detail? Had they trained all the troops in advance so that they could cooperate well in battle? The Devers' dissatisfaction was finally vented through each and every question, making Buckos blush with shame. He felt that the Devers had really put their heart and soul into this battle. He wanted to speak a few times but stopped himself. Finally, he resolutely said, Devers, don't worry. After I go to Dracos's camp, I'll rush back immediately to pass on your suggestion to Felix and ask him to consider it seriously. After Buckos left, the Devers immediately called for assists. How's the practice of climbing the stone wall with rope hooks? They can climb stone walls with ease. The hook you designed is really a good tool for climbing. That's great. The Devers finally had a smile on his face. Go to the market immediately and tell Marigi that I want to order another 20 sets of rope hook. Ask him to urge the blacksmith shop to finish them in 2 days. All right, I'll go immediately. One morning at the end of April 399 AD, the weather was warm, the sun was bright, and flowers were blooming all over the mountains. It was a good day for an outing. However, there were scouts everywhere on the Zubari plains, and the air was filled with a tense atmosphere of killing. The mercenary leader's tent was filled with officers. The Devers looked around. Among them were old comrades who had always followed him, such as Helos, Antonios, and Capus. There were also acquaintances who had just joined, such as Hieronymus, Agathia, and so on. Now, all of them had solemn expressions, as if they were facing a formidable enemy, waiting for his instructions. The Lucanian army has already advanced towards Turan. The Turan have already sent someone to inform us to meet up with them immediately. Brothers, the Devers was full of confidence. He smiled and said, It's time for these ignorant and arrogant Turan to see the true power of the Greek expeditionary army. Ha! The officers were full of fighting spirit. According to the previous arrangement, the 5th Heavy Infantry Company led by Helos and the 3rd Light Infantry Company led by Alpines. This is made up of mercenaries who joined the Byzantine Empire. There are archers and stone throwers, and there are more than 200 of them, will stay in the camp to prevent the enemy from sneaking up on them. The rest of the troops will leave the camp in order. Yes, When the Turan army left the city, they saw the Devers mercenaries waiting outside the city. This is the Greek expeditionary army? I think it's an exaggeration. Look at these soldiers, they are either squatting or lying on the ground. Their spears and shields are thrown to the side. They don't look like soldiers at all, Cunagurata said with a pained expression, as if he had spent a lot of money on low-quality goods. Felix was worried about the upcoming battle, and he didn't have the mood to argue with Cunagurata about such common military knowledge. At this time, a young man next to him said without hesitation, "The messenger we sent out to inform them should have just returned, and this army is already standing here waiting for us." It can be seen that this army's ability to mobilize and execute orders is very strong. As for squatting and lying on the ground, that's to conserve energy before the battle starts. It also shows that they are experienced, and they can still be so relaxed when the battle is about to begin. I'm starting to believe that they have the ability to support the left wing by themselves. Cunagurata snorted. After all, this young man was an important guest of the Turan, so he could only keep his mouth shut. At this moment, the Devers galloped towards them under the lead of Buckos. "General Felix, the leader of the mercenaries, the Devers, salute you." The Devers saluted solemnly on their horses. "Although Buckos told me about you before, I'm still surprised by your youth. Young leader, thank you for your help to the Turan. Let us fight the enemy together today." Felix also saluted solemnly in response. "As you wish, General Felix," the Devers agreed, then turned to Cunagurata. Daves agreed, then turned to Cunagurata. Because of Bucko's guidance, of course, he could accurately call out his name. "I salute you, General Cunagurata. Chief Devers, your proposal is very bold. To be honest, I was very tempted by it, but the generals felt that it was too risky after some discussion, so they didn't accept it. I hope you don't mind." Cunagurata was slightly apologetic as he specially explained. He even urged his horse forward and patted Devers' shoulder to show his closeness. The discussion before the battle is for the benefit of the masses. Once a decision is made, we must resolutely carry it out. Don't worry, I'm a soldier, and it's my natural duty to carry out orders. Well said, it's my natural duty to carry out orders. The young man praised loudly and took the initiative to introduce himself. "Hello, Chief Devers. I'm Archita of Tarentum. I've always heard of the legendary stories of the Greek expeditionary force. Meeting you today, I'm not disappointed." The Devers fixed their eyes on the young man in front of them. Although he was wearing a military uniform, he looked gentle and refined. He had a sincere smile on his face and a pair of bright eyes that were slightly deep. "General Archita, Tarentum has a dual governor system, so there's no title of general. It's just an honorific title, the mathematical and military genius of Tarentum. It's my honor to fight alongside you." The Devers returned the salute in a friendly manner and continued. "I believe that mathematics and military affairs are inevitably related. Every soldier in a formation is a point, and countless points form straight lines and squares. The basic condition for victory is how to make every point play its role to the fullest. You're absolutely right." Archita was happy and asked amiably, "Chief Devers, you've also studied mathematics?" "I don't know much about mathematics, but I'm full of respect for the Pythagorean school of thought," the Devers said seriously. Archita saw that he was sincere and immediately had a good impression of him. He was about to speak again. "The leaders of the other mercenaries are rushing over. Now, let us clarify our respective duties together and unify our orders." Chapter 83. The bugles to attack and retreat were more or less the same, and the Turris military deployment was basically unchanged, except for the 200 cavalrymen assigned to Archita. This made Archita even more fond of the Devers, and he thanked him profusely. Buckos stood not far away and watched everyone discuss. He also had a good impression of the Devers, but he didn't understand. Why would the Devers sing praises for the Pythagorean school of thought at this time? He hadn't mentioned it before. Didn't he know that in Greece, other than Tarentum, no city would have a good impression of the Pythagorean school of thought, making it difficult for this mysterious group to survive in Greece? His attitude would probably affect Felix and Cunigarata's impression of him. Just as Buckos was worrying for the Devers, the meeting before the battle ended quickly. The Devers jumped onto his horse and slowly walked towards his troops while observing the two troops that were about to fight side by side. The Tarentum reinforcements led by Urchita were all strong young men in their 20s or 30s. They carried a round shield on their left shoulder, a bayonet on their right shoulder, and a helmet on their shoulder. As they marched, they chatted with their companions and looked relaxed. On the other hand, the Turris militiamen looked solemn, and many of them had white hair and slightly hunched bodies. As he watched, the Devers frowned. Suddenly, he felt that something was wrong. He pointed to the back of the troops and asked Buckos, who was following beside him, "What's going on? Why are there still soldiers wearing leather armor? Wait. Some of them are even half-naked, and there are quite a number of such soldiers. No, there are more than 4,000 of you." Buckos continued, "Those are all freedmen and foreigners living in Turris." After discussion, the Turris Assembly passed a resolution that all freedmen and foreigners who participate in this war will become Turris citizens after the war is won. Speaking of which, it was your suggestion that reminded us. Now, the Turris have about 6,000 people. Buckos was slightly pleased with himself. This slightly eased the uneasiness in the Dever's heart. He sighed and said, "I didn't expect there to be so many free people in Turin. In fact, this is only a small portion. More than half of the freedmen are still observing and have not joined in the battle." Buckos' words surprised the Devers, but at the same time, it also made him ponder. The Turii army was divided into 3 columns on the left, center, and right. They formed a long line on the plain of Sibari and advanced slowly westward along the Krati River. The scouts kept coming back and forth to report on the Lucanians' movements. The messenger hurried over and said to the leader of the Devers, "General Felix has ordered you to stop advancing and form up here." "Got it." The Devers nodded in response, then said to the bugler beside him, "Sound the horn, stop advancing." The bugle sounded, and the mercenaries quickly stopped moving forward. "Order, get into formation." The Devers ordered again. The bugler blew the bronze horn again. Immediately, the front of the mercenary column moved to the right, and the back moved forward. The Devers' army used squads as their basic combat units. Squads were only used for management and couldn't fight independently. When they lined up according to the order of 4 squads. Therefore, when the entire long line of the mercenary column moved to the west, the formation was basically complete. It was very fast. The Devers lined up the 1st Heavy Infantry Company on the right side. Since this side was connected to the middle of the Turii army, the steady commander of the 1st Heavy Infantry Company, Capus, controlled the pace of the troops' attack and retreat to prevent them from getting separated from the middle. On the left side was the 3rd Heavy Infantry Company led by Amintas. Considering the large number of enemies, the left flank might be surrounded, and a brave and courageous company commander would keep the morale of the soldiers high. In fact, the Devers felt that Hieronymus, who was also brave and had more combat experience, was more suitable for this task. However, this ex-expeditionary general had too many new recruits under his command, those who joined the Devers in the Byzantine Empire, and the Devers were still worried. The good thing was that Amintas had the support of 2 companies of light shield soldiers, and they believed that it would be no problem for them to stabilize the defensive line. Traditionally, the Greek phalanx formation had at least 8 rows, but the Devers' army only had 4 rows. This was because they had fewer soldiers, and they had to ensure the length of the defensive line. Therefore, they had to be thinner in terms of thickness. However, the Devers believed that the experienced mercenaries could completely block the large number of enemies. The formation on the left side had been completed, and the middle side was still slowly unfolding. The shouts of the officers, the orders of the messengers, and the reminders of the soldiers to each other intertwined with each other. It was like a noisy market. Ferris placed the 1,000 mercenaries of Dracos at the front of the line, the Turii citizen soldiers in the middle, and the free civilians behind them. The thickness of the formation was more than 10 rows. The formation on the right side was also faster. Orchita placed the Tarantum militia at the front, the mercenaries at the back, and the 200 cavalrymen at the far right. His phalanx formation was also 8 rows thick. Finally, the formation on the middle side was completed, and the formations on the left, center, and right were connected into a line. The Turii priests carried the statue of the sun god Apollo, the protector of the Turii. They came to the front of the phalanx and began to chant hymns, offer blood, and pray for victory in the war. The soldiers of Tarantum also began to pray to Apollo for his protection. The soldiers of Tarantum were also praying, but not to the sun god. Their city-state had its own patron god, Poseidon, and even the legendary demigod, Phrantis. Most of the mercenaries believed in Ares, the god of war, and Zeus, the main god. However, the soldiers of the Devers were different. They used to believe in Ares, but after the Devers led them to victory after victory and created many miracles, they began to believe in Hades. While the entire army was immersed in praying to the gods, the scouts came back one after another, bringing the news that the Lucanian army was about to arrive. The Lucanian scouts also appeared in front of the Greek army, but they were quickly forced back by the overwhelming numbers of the Greek cavalry. The Lucanians are less than 3 miles away from us. We should get the entire army ready, Cunagurata said nervously. Ferris waved his hand and said, "There's no rush. The Lucanians won't attack so quickly. Their army hasn't appeared yet. Even if they do, it will take some time to set up the battle formation." Cunagurata retreated angrily. After a while, he saw a patch of golden light in the distant plains. It covered the entire mountains and plains, like a golden torrent rolling towards the east. Cunagurata gasped and said nervously, just like the young leader of the mercenaries said, "The Lucanians have changed into our weapons and armor. This is going to be troublesome." "Don't worry. Even if the Lucanians change their equipment, they won't be able to learn our battle formation in such a short time. They've also abandoned their own strengths, which might be a good thing," Ferris comforted him calmly. Then he turned to the herald and said, "Go inform the officers and tell them not to worry. Let the soldiers continue to rest. Damn it, we're behind the sun. It's hurting my eyes when the sun shines on them. When the battle starts, it'll affect Epitines and Xpit's javelin throwing." Martoris felt uneasy. "What can we do? We're in the east. Isn't Apollo the guardian of Turii? Why don't we ask them to pray to Apollo and not come out today?" Olivers joked. "Why don't we ask our Devers leader to directly ask Hades to turn day into night? Then we won't have to fight this battle," Epitines also joked. Chapter 84. The Lucanian allied army stopped advancing when they were 2 miles away from the Hope army. They also began to get into formation. The Hope army just waited quietly and did not take the opportunity to attack. This was not surprising because the Turris hoped to change their passive situation with this battle, and the Lucanians also hoped to use this battle to completely destroy the remaining Turris forces. Therefore, a battle was the common wish of both sides. If the Hope army attacked at this time, the Lucanian allied army could only retreat under the circumstances that they had not finished getting into formation, and it would be difficult for the infantry to chase the infantry at a distance of 1,000 meters. In the end, it would only cause the time of the battle to be delayed. This was unacceptable to the Turris generals, who had already made meticulous preparations. The citizens could not accept it either because it meant that they would have to live in fear for a longer period of time. The Hope army gave the Lucanian allied army enough time to get into formation, and the Lucanians made full use of this time. As the scouts had reported the general situation of the Hope Army's formation to the leaders of the Allied Army, the leaders of the Allied Army had an urgent discussion and quickly decided on the positions of the troops in the formation. The great leader of the Grimentum city, Akapiru, led 6,000 tribal warriors in the middle, the two cities of Nudum and Laos, a total of 4,500 warriors in the left wing, and the main ally of the Grimentum city, another powerful tribe in Lucania city, led 4,000 warriors in the Union Picassus city, plus 1,500 warriors from the British city of Vigo, a total of 5,500 people, were on the right wing. The total strength of the Lucanian Allied Army was 16,000 people, without cavalry. The city of Grimentum had been at war for the past 2 years, and its great leader, Akapiru, was considered experienced in military affairs. Before the war, he had sent a lot of spies in disguise to enter the port of Tourist City. This was the place with the most free people, where it was difficult to be discovered, and obtained a lot of information. Combined with the reports of today's spies, he already had a plan in mind. Although many of the tourist soldiers in the middle of the Hope Army were slightly older, they were large in number and could not be underestimated. He would personally deal with them. The Hope Army's right wing was the reinforcements from Tarentum. It was said that the troops had defeated the Masapi many times in Tarentum, so their fighting strength was not bad. Nudum and Laos were sister cities, so cooperation was not a problem. 4,500 people were more than enough to deal with them. The Hope Army's left wing had the least number of people. The scouts could almost see the difference in the number of people between it and the other two lines at a glance because it had too few people. It was said that this Greek mercenary army had once gone on an expedition to Persia, but after hearing the stories about them, Akapiru thought that the rumors about this army were exaggerated. They had only lost a battle in Persia and fled back. The Greeks who were doing business always liked to brag about themselves. He had no concept of the distant eastern country of Persia. He thought that the strength of a troop of 2,000 people was limited. The bravery of the Picassus soldiers was not weaker than that of Grimentum. Its great leader, Sinsing, was not weak either. Moreover, his son, Ninath, who was also Akapiru's son-in-law, was the most valiant of the tribe. With 4,000 warriors and 1,500 Briti warriors, it was almost 3 times the strength of the opponent. It was completely possible to defeat the Hope Army's left wing in one fell swoop. Therefore, he locked the chance of victory on his right wing. The Lucanians' formation was faster because their formation was not as tight as that of the Hope Army. The loose formation made the already large team even larger. Following a few long and drawn-out horn sounds, an astonishing number of troops slowly pressed towards Shi's army like they could topple the mountains and overturn the seas. The battle was about to begin. His cloudy old eyes could already see the shadows of the enemies in front of him. He took a deep breath, puffed up his somewhat shriveled chest, and dismounted. He ordered his slaves, "Bring me my weapon and helmet." Just then, he heard a commotion from the soldiers in front of him. "What happened?" he asked, puzzled. The people around him were equally puzzled. He could only get on his horse again and look forward. There was no change in front of him. But following the direction of the commotion, he saw hundreds of soldiers on the left wing rushing out of the square formation and running towards the Lucanians. What are they doing? Are they surrendering to the enemy? The moment he thought of this possibility, a chill ran down his spine. Could it be that, as some people said, mercenaries without a sense of belonging are unreliable? Epthenes and Xpit led more than 600 light infantry out of the formation and charged towards the dark mass of the Lucanian army's right wing. Of course, they weren't going to surrender. Instead, they were executing a new tactic that the Devers leader had been practicing. Before the two armies clashed, they would use light infantry to attack the enemy from afar. This would break the enemy's spirit and disrupt their formation. In the face of such a large number of enemies, the hundreds of lonely soldiers were like small trees in the wind. in danger of being blown away at any time. This kind of psychological pressure and fear would cause the timid to collapse, but these soldiers had been tempered by hundreds and thousands of battles during the Persian expedition, and their spirits were extremely tough. Their formation was scattered but not disorderly, and the speed at which they were charging forward was even faster. When they were less than 400 meters away from the enemy, Epiphanes and Xpit shouted almost at the same time, "Stone throwers, get ready!" The stone throwers stopped in their tracks and began to untie the catapults around their waist. The rest of the soldiers continued to advance. When they were almost 100 meters away from the enemy, the archers stopped in their tracks. The 400 light shield-bearers were still running forward. The reason why Grelot of Picosus was loved and respected by the warriors of the tribe was because he always took the lead in every battle and fought on the front lines. Seeing the Greeks in leather armor line up in two loose lines and charging straight at him, he was a little confused at first. To the north of Picosus was the Greek city-state of Ilia. Picosus had invaded its territory many times, and both sides fought frequently. Ninath was more familiar with the Greeks' fighting style, but he had never seen such a strange move. But soon, when the Greek raised the gleaming spearhead, took a big step, and prepared to throw it, he was shocked. "Watch out for the javelin! Defend!" Hundreds of javelins whistled through the air, bringing with them the sound of the wind. The experienced light shield-bearers did not throw them in a straight line, but diagonally forward. Although the Lucanians were fully equipped with Greek heavy infantry equipment, they did not learn the Greek heavy infantry principle of, "I protect others, others protect me." They hurriedly used their round shields to protect themselves, causing a large gap to appear in the originally slightly loose battle line. These javelins, which divers had deliberately increased the weight of the spearheads, passed through the gap between the shields, and most of them pierced into the ribs of the tribal warriors, who were covered by multiple layers of linen armor. Screams rang out and a large number of people fell. Ninath reacted quickly and blocked the javelin with his shield. The javelin actually pierced through the copper coating of the shield and nailed itself on it. Just as he was about to pull the javelin out, someone beside him shouted, "Watch out for the arrows!" Arrows and stones rained down on the ground. Ninath took a hit on the head. Although he had a helmet to protect him, it still made him dizzy and almost fall. The Lucanians did not suffer many losses from this wave of arrows and stones, but it caused chaos in the first few lines of the Lucanians' right wing. However, the Greek light shield-bearers took the opportunity to throw a second round of javelins, which greatly increased the damage of the javelins. Felix and Cunigurata were dumbfounded when they saw this scene. They had guessed the fighting power of the Devers mercenaries, but they never expected them to use such a novel tactic, and the effect was so shocking. Seeing that part of the enemy's front line on the right wing was almost broken, Cunigurata said excitedly, "If we knew that these mercenaries were so powerful, we should have learned from them and used this tactic." Felix shook his head. "Our light infantry wouldn't be so bold as to leave their formation and attack a large number of enemies from a few hundred meters away. Only these experienced mercenaries would dare to do this. I'm afraid this is a tactic they learned from Persia." Although Felix said that, he still felt a little regretful. The fighting power of the Devers mercenaries had exceeded his expectations before the battle had even started. Perhaps he should have listened to the young mercenary leader's suggestion and given him the other 2,000 mercenaries. Felix suppressed the thought. Since the initial plan had already been executed, it was best to carry it through to the end. This was the experience he had gained after many years in the army. Chapter 85. Oh, these brothers are so powerful! As expected of the heroes who fought all the way to Persia and came back. Look at those stone throwers, they're all from my hometown, Rhodes. And us Thracians, look at how accurate their javelins are. I really want to take off this heavy armor, pick up a javelin and join them. Dracos heard the praise and envy of the soldiers around him. He squeezed the belt behind the round shield tightly. "Come on, natives, come and have a taste of our power." At this moment, He was burning with the desire to fight. The confident leader of Picas's city, Sinsing, would never have thought that his troops would suffer such a blow before the battle had even officially begun. What made him even more depressed was that the traditional weapons of the Lucanians were javelins, pikes, and short swords. Javelins were also their forte, but in order to better attack the Greeks, most of them had changed into heavy equipment. Only a few javelin soldiers were at the rear, and the enemy's arrows and flying stones had already extended to the rear. Only a few of the javelin soldiers could fight back as they dodged the attack. However, they could not see the enemy, and the enemy's numbers were small and scattered, so the results of the battle were naturally minimal. Fortunately, there were not many enemy light infantry, and the two ends of the right phalanx were not affected. Therefore, in desperation, Sinsing urged the two ends to squeeze towards the center in an attempt to surround or disperse these annoying and terrifying enemies. When the Lucanians in the middle and left saw the tragic situation on the right, they were afraid that they would suffer the same fate. The soldiers and leaders subconsciously increased their speed, hoping to make contact with the Greek army as soon as possible. Tens of thousands of soldiers took large strides forward, and the earth trembled. Archetta, Felix, Dracos, and so on, every general and leader began to shout, "Shield formation, defend." At the front of the phalanx were the soldiers, with their left foot slightly bent forward and their right foot on the ground. Round shields were placed in front of their left, and their spears were raised high with the spears pointed forward. The soldiers at the back were stacked on top of each other, pressing against the backs of the soldiers at the front. Spears extended forward, and shields connected. The entire phalanx was like a huge metal monster covered in long spikes. The Lucanian warriors charged forward at a distance of more than 100 meters, coupled with the slightly elevated terrain. Although the Zibari plain was flat, the terrain would gradually rise as it extended westward. With a strong momentum, the Lucanian warriors crashed straight into the Greek army's infantry phalanx. With a loud bang, at the end of April 399 BC, the battle between the Turii and the Lucanian tribes had officially begun. This was a battle of life and death for both sides, but in the eyes of the powerful countries in the Mediterranean Sea, it was insignificant. Carthage and Syracuse would not notice, because both sides were accumulating strength and were about to start a new round of confrontation for dominance in Sicily. Rome would not notice, because they were busy besieging and attacking the Etruscan Empire on the upper reaches of the Tiber River. Sparta and Persia would not notice, because both sides were making their own preparations for the upcoming war in Asia Minor. Athens would not notice, because their energy was focused on how to recover the dazzling power that had been lost over the years of war, and at the same time, they had to endure Sparta's tyrannical behavior. Macedonia would not notice, because at this time, its kingdom was fragmented, and the kings were changing frequently. The Macedonians, who were suffering from internal and external troubles, might be hoping for a strong monarch to save them from the abyss of suffering. Hundreds of kingdoms, city-states, and races in the Mediterranean Sea were either busy surviving or busy invading. They did not have the time nor the ability to understand the battle between two unknown forces in the south of the Italian peninsula. However, this battle, later known as the Battle of Turii, had opened the most magnificent and glorious new chapter in the magnificent ancient history of the Mediterranean Sea. The Lucarians were a tribe in the mountains. They were passionate and impulsive. During the rapid charge, their fighting spirit continued to rise. Therefore, when they saw the spear and shield formation in front of them, some of the warriors did not think of raising their shields and ramming them into the formation that their leaders had emphasized before. Their minds were already filled with the surging fighting spirit, so they directly jumped into the formation. This was especially so for the Grimentum. The long years of conquest had produced a large number of warriors who lived by fighting, so there were many who adopted such reckless actions. Although it was easier to be stabbed, it disrupted the defensive formation of the Greek army. Especially the Turii militia and the mercenaries of Dracos in the middle, because they had not trained together before, their coordination was not very good. Naturally, the horizontal line of the formation was not very close, and in addition, Dracos had never seen such a way of attacking the mountain people, so they lacked the means to deal with it. Therefore, the middle of the Greek army was in a difficult battle from the beginning. On the other hand, the Tarentum militia on the right wing of the Greek army in front of the phalanx was obviously more experienced in dealing with the attacks of the Lucanian warriors. The warriors of Nudum and Laus were far less ferocious than the warriors of the Grimentum, so they did not cause too much impact on the right wing of the Greek army. Both sides' shields collided, spears exchanged, and they began to push and kill each other. 200 cavalrymen also rode forward, attacking the flank of the Lucanian left wing from time to time. As long as the Lucanian warriors came forward to stop them, they immediately withdrew and retreated. The Greek cavalrymen were still flowers in a greenhouse. They were far from the superb horsemanship of the Numidians, nor were they as fierce as the Gaul and Germanic cavalrymen. They could only play a role of harassment. But even so, it made the Lucanian left wing wary, and did not dare to go all out to attack. Therefore, even though they had more people than the right wing of the Greek army, and the phalanx was thicker, the two sides were still in a stalemate. When the left and middle of the Lucanian army had begun fighting, the right wing was still advancing slowly. The mercenary light infantry retreated as they fought, successfully delaying the enemy's advance. The distance between the two armies was almost 50 meters. Some of the light infantry retreated from the front and the outside of the phalanx, while others passed through the gap left by the phalanx and retreated to the rear. At this time, the formation of the Lucanian army's right wing had become a crescent, with two protruding ends and a hollow in the middle. Sinsing, who was in the middle of the formation, had already lost control of his army, let alone reorganize the formation. The only thing he could do was to order the bugler to blow the horn to charge. The only distance of 50 meters would be the bonus for the warrior's final sprint. When the horn was blown, there was a rhythmic sound of a bronze horn coming from the opposite side. This made Sinsing instantly vigilant. While he was nervously guessing what this powerful enemy would do next, Ninath, who was at the forefront of the battle line and had many injuries on his body, could clearly see the Greek heavy infantry on the opposite side raise their right arms, lean their bodies back, and take 2 steps forward. This action, Gleinart, who was already a bird startled by the mere twang of a bow, quickly hid behind his round shield. Thousands of javelins flew dozens of meters in an instant and landed on the Lucanian army, who were just about to charge. What they created was no longer ripples like before, but waves of death. In an instant, hundreds of people were killed and injured, and the Lucanian army's advance was almost stopped at this time. The terrifying sound of the bronze horn sounded again. The Greek mercenaries immediately shouted, "Hades!" and charged forward with their shields and spears in hand. The mercenaries did not charge at the same time. The soldiers at the far right did not charge forward because they were considering connecting with the middle, while the soldiers at the middle and left completely disregarded their weak formation and the number of enemies. They charged at the enemy with high fighting spirit, like a long dragon swinging its tail with great force. The Lucanian army's front line had not recovered from the javelin attack just now, and their formation was in chaos. And at this time, the mercenaries' charge came one after another. The soldiers skillfully converted the momentum from the speed of their charge into a collision with their shields, breaking through the enemy's defense. Then, the spears in their right hands were like the spitting of a venomous snake, quickly and accurately piercing the enemy's throat or face. A row of Lucanian soldiers at the front line fell uniformly. Such terrifying attack efficiency and imposing momentum frightened the Lucanian soldiers at the back. They, who prided themselves on their bravery, could not help but start to retreat at this moment. The mercenaries chased after them, and the Lucanian soldiers kept retreating. The collapse of the Lucanian army's right flank was right in front of them. Chapter 86. Although Sinsing, who was at the rear of the phalanx, could not understand the situation in detail, It was an indisputable fact that the troops were retreating. Screams could be heard continuously. Looking to both sides, there were even soldiers in the distance who had begun to flee. Sinsing was anxious and angry. At this moment, he had no time to think about why such a terrible situation had occurred. The most important thing now was to stop the decline, or else the right wing would be defeated, which would lead to the defeat of the entire Lucania Alliance army. Although Akapiru was related by marriage, Sinsing did not think that the overbearing great leader of the Grimentum would easily forgive Picassus for what he had done. Now that Picassus's soldiers were engaged in battle, he could no longer command them. The only ones he could command were the British soldiers who had yet to engage in battle. Quick, call the people from Vigo City at the back to help. Tell their leader that if this battle fails, the Lucarians will not forgive Vigo City. Sinsing hurriedly shouted to the guards around him. Great leader, the Lucanians have gone too far. It was Sinsing who thought that he could easily defeat the Greeks, and did not let us intervene. Now he's saying that it's our fault if we fail. The young Saru said angrily. Sidorum looked at the battle not far away and did not respond. These Greeks are really powerful. They are obviously outnumbered, but they are actually about to defeat the Lucarians. Saru looked ahead and said with excitement and hesitation, Great leader, the Lucanians are about to lose. Why don't we stop fighting and leave? Maybe we can take the opportunity to leave their alliance. At this moment, Sidorum spoke. Even if the Lucanians are defeated, how many of them can die? Do the Greeks dare to enter the mountains? Saru, as long as the Lucanian strength is still there, the mountains in the west will still be theirs. Unless we follow the example of our people in Cosenza and move south, and are forced to fight with Clotho for land. Sidorum sighed. Order the soldiers to close the formation and press forward from the right. 2,000 Briti wore leather armor and held wooden shields and spears, but they formed a phalanx that was even tighter than the Lucanians. When the right end of Picassus's formation was about to collapse, they stuck to its rear. Instead, they were pushed forward by Briti. In order to survive, most of the Lucanian warriors had to turn around and fight. After all, the Lucanian formation was solid. It was panic that caused them to flee, and it was not the mercenaries that broke through their formation. Once the reinforcements arrived, they gradually stabilized their position. The emotions of the defeated soldiers gradually calmed down, and the organization of the formation began to recover. The casualties of the Lucanians were still increasing, but the mercenaries were gradually retreating. The pushing force produced by the super-thick formation of the Lucanians and the Briti was obviously not something the thin formation of the mercenaries could compare to. Once the gap between the two armies became narrow, superb combat skills would not be of much use. Fortunately, the experienced mercenaries took the initiative to slowly retreat to relieve the pressure exerted by the opponent, thus maintaining the tenacity of the front line. Unlike other generals, Devers did not participate in the battle personally. Once the battle started, he would completely let the situation develop. He rode his horse and closely observed the progress of the battle from left to right, then from right to left, and then from right to left. He would give orders to the messengers at any time. Previously, when the right end of the Lucanian formation was about to collapse, he was excited. Who knew that the situation would be reversed, and one could imagine the disappointment in his heart. However, he did not urge the soldiers to attack again, because he knew that other than the arrival of the enemy's reinforcements, it was also related to the soldiers' physical strength. Such a fierce attack could not last for too long. As long as they were human, there was a limit to their physical strength, not to mention they were heavy infantry. Even at the critical moment, Devers even ordered the light shield soldiers to join the attack on the right end of the enemy's formation. Unfortunately, if the 2,000 mercenaries and 200 cavalrymen were under his command, the soldiers would now be chasing after the routed army. He could only blame himself for being too confident. He did not pester the tourists and insisted on asking for more troops. Just as the thought of regret appeared in his mind, Devers extinguished it. Any unexpected situation could happen in a war, and it was impossible for the commander to foresee everything. At this moment, the only thing he could do was to maintain a calm mind and try not to let excessive emotions affect his judgment. The formation of the mercenaries was originally an arc with an upturned tail, but now it was gradually flattened. As the phalanx moved back step by step, Devers realized that the soldiers had to contend with the enemy's powerful pushing force while preventing the thin formation from being broken. They also had to kill as many enemies as possible during the battle. The consumption of physical strength and energy was considerable, and it was already very good that they could maintain this state. Unless there was a major accident, the left wing of the tourist coalition army would not improve. As for the middle, the assists' return was not optimistic, even worse than the left wing. The only advantage was on the right wing, but it was not much. This was the judgment of the assists who rode forward to scout, based on the fact that Tarantum's formation had only advanced a little. After understanding that the overall situation of the battlefield was unfavorable, Devers got rid of the remaining hope in their hearts, and had to consider the issue of the retreat of the troops if they lost the battle. On the land of 10 miles around the Zubari plain, nearly 30,000 soldiers were engaged in a battle of life and death here. Dust flew everywhere, the sounds of killing shook the sky, and blood splattered everywhere. After more than an hour of fierce battle, the Greek army gradually began to feel exhausted. The Lucanian tribal coalition army outnumbered the tourists by 6,500 people. According to the observations of the tourists and Devers' scouts, they originally estimated that there were about 13,000 Lucanians. In fact, the cunning Akapiru had hidden some of his troops in the mountains behind the camp, and the 2,000 from Vigo City only joined at the last moment, thus causing an error in the Greek army's judgment. On the other hand, Felix's impression of the Lucanians was still that of a few years ago. He did not participate in the battle last year. In fact, in recent years, the Lucanians had developed rapidly, especially the Gramentum, which had begun to break away from the tribal alliance and develop into a kingdom. In the recent 2 years of tribal annexation wars, the warriors of the Gramentum had become braver and more tenacious under the frequent baptism of blood. In the old ideas of the tourist generals, as long as they fought head-on, the loosely organized Lucanians would definitely be crushed by the power of the Greek heavy infantry. But reality proved that their ideas were laughable, especially in the middle of the Greek army. The mercenaries at the front, the tourists in the middle, and the freedmen at the back, the three forces could not effectively combine into one. Under the fierce attack of the Gramentum warriors, the Greek army in the middle began to retreat. As the battle continued, the soldiers who were born with different backgrounds began to have different ideas. The mercenaries were fighting for money, and in a situation where there was no hope of victory, of course, they would first think of saving their own lives. The tourists were indeed fighting with all their might, but half of them were middle-aged men, and their physical strength was already at its limit. They were still holding on because the tourists was their homeland, and they could not let the barbarians trample on it. The freedmen, on the other hand, were originally fighting with an attitude of trying their luck. If they won, they would obtain citizenship, and if they lost, they would flee from tourists to find a new life in another city. As the Greek army retreated faster and faster, the gap between them and the left and right flanks widened. When the Gramentum warriors rushed into the gap on both sides and attacked the Greek army from the side, the entire formation in the middle collapsed, and the soldiers fled in all directions. The Devers, who had been watching the situation closely, sighed. They suppressed their extreme disappointment and decisively ordered a retreat. The retreat signal designed by the Devers was more special, and it was very different from the general Greek army. It started with a long note, followed by the melody of the charge horn. The bugler blew it 3 times, and most of the Lucanian soldiers thought that the mercenaries were going to charge again. While they were still in a daze, the mercenaries pulled away a little, and the light shield-bearers at the back threw their javelins again. This was really a bold move. Without strict training, it was easy to accidentally hurt your own comrade. While the Lucarians were busy defending themselves, the mercenaries quickly completed a series of retreating movements, such as turning around, running, and so on. Chapter 87. The Tarantum reinforcements on the right flank were forced to retreat as well. Fortunately, they had 200 cavalrymen on standby. The Lucaria warriors didn't dare to chase after them, afraid that they would be too spread out and let the Lucaria cavalry take advantage of them. Thus, the Tarantum reinforcements' retreat was relatively smooth. Only the center of the Lucaria army was in a state of disunity. "General Felix, we've lost. We've lost. What should we do? What should we do?" Cunigurata, the usually witty and eloquent general in the city hall, was panicking at this moment. "What else can we do?" Felix laughed bitterly and said regretfully, "It's my fault that I didn't stick to my opinion. It's my fault that I underestimated the enemy. It's my fault that I didn't listen to the advice of others. It's my fault that Turris lost today." He looked at the fleeing soldiers running past him, and his expression became firm. "Hurry back to Turris and get the citizens to prepare for defense. I'll buy time for Turris to repent to Apollo." As he spoke, he picked up his spear with his withered arm and pushed the fleeing soldiers aside to face the incoming enemy. The guards, slaves, and tribesmen he brought with him shouted, "For Turris!" Hundreds of them surrounded the old general and charged forward. Wherever it passed, some of the citizens of Tulii were influenced. They stopped fleeing and joined in the fray. Cunigurata hesitated for a moment before turning his horse around and retreating. As he ran, he comforted himself. Felix was right. If they all died here, who would protect Turris? When they faced the enemy, Felix's army had reached 800 men. The old general, who was over 60 years old, shouted, "Apollo!" The first to charge into the enemy's formation was followed by a counterattack. The soldiers were not afraid of death and fought bravely. To the surprise of the Gramentum warriors, their formation was almost broken. The Gramentum warriors had no choice but to gather their soldiers and surround the small group of brave and tenacious Tulii soldiers. The most tragic scene of the battle had finally come to an end. The 800 Tulii led by Felix had all died in battle. Not a single one of them had escaped. Cunigurata wanted to rush back to Tulii as soon as possible. On the way to escape on horseback, he was almost knocked down by the defeated soldiers several times. He was worried about the safety of the city and a little regretful. He should not have joined the battle in order to gain prestige. The city of Turris was only 5 or 6 miles away from the battlefield. Everyone was paying attention to this battle that concerned the fate of the city. Every family was either at home or in the square, praying for the soldiers. When the scouts ran back to the city, they shouted in panic, "We lost! We lost!" At that time, the news quickly spread throughout the city like a thunderclap, making the people feel that the sky was about to fall. The timid people fainted immediately. The suspicious people thought that the scout was spreading rumors and wanted to drag him down from his horse and beat him up. The pessimistic people declared that Tulii was going to perish and asked everyone to quickly flee the city. The scoundrels, in their despair, took the opportunity to stir up trouble and fish in troubled waters, hoping to take advantage of the chaos to gain some benefits. The whole city, especially the square, was filled with cries and the scene was extremely chaotic. The two most important leaders of the 9 generals were on the battlefield. Fortunately, the generals had learned from last year's defeat. At this critical moment, the generals, led by Neones, stood up. They first sent out patrols to maintain order in the city, then called on the people in the square to take up arms and defend their homes. They led their people and slaves up the city wall. At this moment, a few nobles, led by Cunigurata, rushed over the drawbridge and entered the city. The people who heard the news immediately surrounded them, asking for news of their families. Cunigurata, who knew the urgency of the situation, acted as if he did not hear them. He shouted anxiously, "The Lucarians are coming! Close the gate! Close the gate! Don't let them in! Otherwise, Turris will be finished. Neoness frowned and said, If we close the gate, the soldiers won't be able to enter the city. Let them go around the city wall and jump into the Kratai River. We will pick them up with boats. The Lucarians can't swim. Cunigarata had already thought of a plan on the way. At the moment of crisis, the appearance of Cunigarata and his suggestion immediately gave the people a backbone. Everyone discussed and felt that it was feasible, so they pulled up the drawbridge, closed the city gate, and began to shout at the defeated soldiers running to the bottom of the city, Jump into the river, we have a boat to pick you up. Jump into the river. The Devers sent assists back to the camp first to report the situation, while they quickly led their troops back to the camp. Leds, who was beside them, held up the flag to guide the troops. Picosis's warriors had been attacked by the light shield-bearers earlier, so they had pulled some distance away from the mercenaries. On the other hand, Gramentum's desperate counterattack had slowed down the mercenaries' pursuit, so the mercenaries' retreat could be said to be smooth without much risk. However, along the way, there were constantly fleeing soldiers who rushed into their ranks, and the mercenaries knocked them down with their shields without hesitation. But the divers mercenaries retreated in an organized manner. Their orderly formation naturally attracted the panicked soldiers. Even if the mercenaries treated them violently, they would just let them beat and scold them. Like tame dogs, they obediently followed behind the mercenaries. When the troops passed by the city of Turin, the Devers team was a little bloated, but they didn't care. Looking at the countless fleeing soldiers gathering at the foot of Turin in the distance, and then back to observe the movements of the pursuing troops, he took the flag, handed it to assists, and said to Leds, Go to the foot of Turin and tell the soldiers that the Lucarians will be here soon. Our camp is very strong, so let them hide in our camp first. Leds accepted the order and left. All troops to the right. The Devers shouted, and the red flag fluttered in the wind, guiding the troops not to enter the camp through the west gate, but to the south gate. The warriors of Picosis, led by Ninath, chased after the mercenaries. Ever since he became a warrior, he had participated in dozens of battles, big and small, but he had never been so vexed, and he even almost lost his life. These Greeks wanted to slip away after slaughtering his people, and this made him even more furious. Therefore, he only had eyes for the mercenaries. Catch them! Kill them! Even though the fleeing soldiers at the foot of Turin were closer to him, he didn't care. As a result, Picosis' team collided with the Gramentum's warriors who were pursuing the fleeing Turin soldiers. When the two armies finally separated, the Devers had already entered the camp. The Turin generals led by Cunigarata had little experience on the battlefield, the only experienced person had died in battle, so they thought too simply of the problem. Indeed, the shouts from the top of the city made some of the fleeing soldiers leave the city gate and jump into the Kratai River, but there were still some who were unwilling to leave. After all, the city gate was right in front of them, and they were too exhausted to take the long way around to jump into the cold Kratai River. They begged and cursed at the foot of the city, and during this delay, the Gramentum's warriors arrived. After a chase and a massacre, the fleeing soldiers had no choice but to jump into the river. However, in their panic and haste, they did not even have time to take off their armor. Many of them sank directly into the river and drowned alive. The people on the city gate watched their loved ones being killed and drowned alive, and all of them burst into tears. Some women even jumped off the city wall, and their bodies were smashed to pieces to accompany their husbands to hell. The ferocious appearance of the Lucanian soldiers and this bloody and tragic scene became a nightmare that the Turin could never get rid of. The Devers heaved a sigh of relief that the Lucanians did not chase them in time. He did not enter the west gate directly, but went around the south gate instead, because he was worried that the soldiers would be too slow when they entered the camp. His worry did not come to nothing. In fact, it was worse than he had imagined. The panicked fleeing soldiers disrupted the order of the troops entering the camp. Chapter 88. At this moment, The Lucaria people had already appeared in the Devers' line of sight. Act according to the defense deployment we trained previously. The Devers immediately gave the order to the captains of the various companies. The captains began to methodically direct their subordinates to their designated positions. 1st Heavy Infantry Company, follow me to the wooden wall on the east side of the north gate. Brothers of the 2nd Heavy Infantry Company, follow me to the wooden wall on the north side of the south gate. Brothers of the 3rd Heavy Infantry Company, follow me to the field. Damn it, hurry up! Archers of the 1st Light Infantry Company, follow the captains to the various outposts on the south side. Soon, the soldiers were in their positions, leaving only the defeated soldiers surrounded by the guards. How many people are there? The Devers asked Felicius, who had just gone over to appease him. Quite a lot. Almost 400 people, most of them free people, and most of them are unarmed, Felicius said. Mercies! The Devers shouted. Mercies hurried over. How many javelins do we have left? 526. We had the tourist blacksmiths rush to make them in the past 2 days. All the money we earned from the market was spent on the manufacture of these weapons. Mercies grumbled. The Devers were not in the mood to listen to his nagging. He said to Felicius, give each of them a javelin, then assign a few people to each team. Let them participate in the defense. Understood. Felicius walked towards the defeated soldiers. Mercies, however, stood there without moving. The Devers understood what he was hesitating about and immediately said, we have to retrieve the javelins when we run out. Furthermore, didn't the Lucaria people send us weapons? These words made Mercies smile. He immediately ordered the slaves to move the weapons to the supply camp. Due to his trust in the Devers, he did not consider the possibility that the mercenaries might not be able to defeat the enemy, and that the camp might be occupied instead. The mercenaries stood behind the wooden wall, not worried at all. They looked at the enemies surging towards the camp calmly, and even had the leisure to educate the new soldiers. Now, do you think it's necessary to build such a complicated camp? Matones asked with a smile. It's absolutely necessary, Septimus said excitedly. Now, I hope that these native barbarians have a good taste of the power of the traps I dug. The mercenaries leaned against the wooden wall, seizing the time to recover their previously exhausted energy. At the same time, they excitedly prepared to watch the show. As for Helos's 5th Heavy Infantry Company, because they hadn't participated in the battle before, they couldn't wait for the enemy to rush over and fight with them. After Picassus's warriors separated from the Grimentum's troops, they immediately continued their pursuit to the east. Ninath ran at the front. The mercenary camp was already in his sight. He shouted, charge! Kill them all! The warriors also roared angrily. Their exhaustion seemed to be dispelled by their roars, and they moved forward even faster. Captain, the Lucanians are less than 200 meters away from the camp. The captain of the archers on the watchtower shouted at Alpins. Remind me when they're 100 meters away. Alpins replied. He then turned around and ordered the catapults behind him. Get ready! Because the path behind the wooden wall was too narrow, the catapults could not use their full power, so they could only move to the bottom of the wall. At this moment, they silently took out egg-sized stones from their leather pouches and placed them in the net in the middle of the catapult. 100 meters! The soldiers on the wooden wall had their eyes fixed ahead. When they saw many Lucanians stepping into the area, they could not help but cheer. Ninath did not know what the Greeks in the camp were shouting about. He subconsciously raised the round shield in his hand. During the pursuit, many warriors felt that the round shield was too heavy and affected their speed, so they threw it away. However, he was still holding it. Greeks, I'll make you lose your voice in a moment. He muttered fiercely. He had just taken a step forward when he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his right foot. It's a trap. He was shocked and instinctively pulled his foot back. However, an even more intense pain came, and he could not speak. He looked down and saw that a large piece of flesh on his right calf had been torn off, and it was bleeding nonstop. Pushing aside the weeds, he saw a sharp, barbed iron spike about 30 centimeters long stabbed into the ground. He tried to pull it out, but he could not pull it out. After digging through the compacted soil, he saw that the lower end of the iron spike was tightly welded to a piece of wood, buried deep in the soil. No wonder it could tear off flesh so forcefully. Vicious Greeks, Ninath cursed. He tore a piece of linen from his body and wrapped it around his injured leg. He propped himself up with a spear, endured the pain, and shouted, "Be careful, there's an iron hook on the ground." His warning was too late. Many warriors fell to the ground, screaming in pain. The mercenaries on the wooden wall heard the screams of their enemies and cheered loudly. "The meat hook is working! Another one down!" The veterans would proudly tell the new recruits that this was the masterpiece of their leader, Dave's, so that the new recruits would revere the Devers even more. In fact, this was the standard of the Roman camp in his previous life. The Devers learned about this from the Military History Forum. This kind of trap did not seem to be very lethal, but in fact, a foot injury was enough to make a warrior lose his combat ability in the era of cold weapons. When the Lucanian warriors saw this, they naturally became more cautious. Stooping down, they searched carefully among the weeds and rocks, advancing cautiously in order to avoid the terrible trap. Unexpectedly, the mercenaries' long-range attacks came. Although the catapults could not see the enemy, with the observation of the archers on the sentry tower, and the large number of Picassus warriors, their accuracy was not low. In order to avoid the flying stones, they naturally could not pay attention to the ground under their feet. Thus, the Picassus warriors were either hit by flying stones or stabbed by iron hooks. After advancing a few dozen meters with difficulty, they encountered an even more terrible trap. The mercenaries called it a tombstone. It was a pit about 1.5 meters deep. There were sharpened wooden stakes buried at the bottom and covered with floating soil. If one accidentally stepped on it, the sharp wooden stakes would be able to pierce through the sole of their foot under the effect of gravity. When the great leader of Picassus, Shinshinagar, arrived, he saw countless warriors lying on the ground, clutching their feet. The mournful cries of disaster lingered in his ears. The other warriors were standing 100 meters away from the enemy camp, their faces filled with fear, not daring to move forward. "What's going on? Why aren't they attacking?" Sinsing asked angrily as he looked at the countless fallen clansmen on the ground. "Father." Ninath used his spear as a crutch and hobbled to his father. He said sorrowfully, "The despicable Greeks set up many traps outside the camp. Many of our warriors are injured, and we can't get close to their camp." "Warriors? How can you call yourselves warriors?" Sinsing's scolding made the people around him lower their heads in shame. Sinsing's heart ached even more when he saw his most valued son covered in wounds and in a sorry state. His usual heroic expression had been replaced by exhaustion and decadence. Sinsing's tone softened. "How are your injuries?" "They're all flesh wounds, I'm fine." Ninath held on and said, "It's just that our clansmen have suffered too many casualties. We can't attack anymore." Sinsing nodded slightly. He looked at the mercenary camp not far away and thought of the casualties these mercenaries had caused to his warriors. A wave of hatred surged in his heart. Let the broody people go. After the Hope army retreated, the warriors of Vigo City did not have the impulsive urge of revenge like the people of Picassus, so their pursuit speed was not fast. They arrived at the same time as Sinsing. They naturally saw the miserable state of the Picassus warriors, but they had to lower their heads. As the great leader of Vigo City, Sidorum accepted Sinsing's order. He only made a request, to borrow the round shields of the Picassus warriors. Sinsing agreed. Chapter 89. The enemy's flying stones were all blocked by the round shields, and did not cause much damage to them. The warriors were still thankful that they had found the right method. After advancing another 10 meters, They were less than 50 meters away from the camp gate. At that moment, the 4 sentry towers behind the west wooden wall of the mercenaries began to shoot arrows at them. It was not easy to block the arrows coming from different angles, and moving the round shields to block the arrows from the 2 sides would result in their heads getting hit by flying stones. However, they were all gathered in the middle, and the mercenaries' archers and stone throwers could concentrate their firepower. The arrows and flying stones came from all directions like hailstones, killing dozens of people in an instant. The front line of the Zegs was almost empty, and the rest of them were so frightened that they forgot the lesson of Pixius and fled in all directions. As a result, the mercenaries' traps made new contributions, and the Zegs suffered hundreds of casualties in a short period of time. No matter how much Sinsing urged them, Sidorum would not attack no matter what. The mercenaries were overjoyed to see the enemy fleeing in panic. However, they were dissatisfied when the enemy stopped attacking. After all, they mainly relied on the light infantry company and the traps to repel the enemy's attack. They did not even touch a single hair of the enemy, so they began to curse loudly in dissatisfaction. Seeing this situation, the Devers nodded to themselves. The morale of the army could be used. He did not expect the enemy's relentless and aggressive attack to stop so quickly without even breaking through the trench in front of the camp. After thinking about it carefully, he understood. After the previous battle, the Lucanians had used up a lot of their stamina and energy. It was probably under the stimulation of victory and revenge that they continued to maintain a strong desire to attack. In fact, these mountain tribes were not good at attacking cities. After suffering a setback in front of the Devers' mercenaries' strong defense, they naturally calmed down. The Devers analyzed the situation of the battle to gain experience for future defensive battles. At the same time, he sent assists through the tunnel to Dracos' camp to check on the situation. The news was also gratifying. Influenced by the expeditionary soldiers' enthusiasm for building the camp, Dracos, Adrianx, and Cesta led the soldiers to dig a deeper trench outside the camp and strengthen the walls. Although they did not set up complicated traps, which required a certain level of technical ability and experience, it was enough to make the pursuing enemy suffer. After all, the Tarantum reinforcements had retreated into their camp, which helped the defeated mercenaries recover their morale quickly. The warriors of Nudum and Laos attacked for a while. After suffering some casualties, they discovered that the mercenaries' defenses were tight and that they could not break through in one fell swoop. Naturally, they gave up the attack. They were obviously smarter than Picosis, who was bent on revenge. After their safety was ensured, the Devers' attention was no longer on the battlefield that was gradually calming down. He needed to calm down and think, what should the mercenaries do next? With the defeat of the battle, it would be quite difficult for the Lucarians to take down the city of Turii. The Devers had inspected it many times. A 6-meter-wide moat and a 10-meter-high wall were difficult for the Lucanians, who lacked siege equipment and experience. Moreover, they did not have boats and could not travel freely on the Krati River. The Lucanians would not mobilize so many people just to win a battle. Their goal should be to occupy the Zubari Plain, build a camp on this flat and fertile land, graze cattle and sheep, and plant wheat. The Turii had suffered huge losses in the 2 battles and were obviously unable to fight back against the Lucanians' invasion for the time being. However, they still had the plains on the south bank of the Krati River. They could temporarily endure, accumulate strength, and recruit soldiers to fight back. However, the situation was not good for the Devers mercenaries on the north bank of the Krati River. Not only did the defeat of the battle affect his next plan, but the mercenaries would also become the main target of the Lucanians. At the same time, the Devers did not want to become a pawn of the Turii, helping them to contain the Lucanians' attack on the north bank. However, he could not accept leading his army away from here, away from Greece. His newly sprouted hope, his dreams, and his ambitions were all here. Divers could not bear to leave without accomplishing anything, so he had to go back to fighting for his survival. What should I do? What should I do? The Lucanian leader, Vespa, who occupied the city of Amendalara, was also distressed. He did not respond to the Grimentum's order to send troops to participate in the battle. He wanted to wait for the results of the battle before deciding whether to stay or leave. Therefore, when he learned that the Lucanian tribal coalition had more than 15,000 troops and easily defeated the Turii, he panicked and hurriedly summoned a few elders to discuss countermeasures. He also asked the priest to predict the outcome of the battle. The result of the divination was, it was a daunting experience but not a dangerous one. This made Vespa, who had come up with a preliminary plan after a heated discussion, feel a little more at ease. He sent messengers and a small group of warriors to drive a pack loaded with wine and food to the Zubari plain, hoping to get a glimmer of understanding from the Grimentum's leader by rewarding the Lucanian tribal coalition in a friendly way. This would lay some foundation for the subsequent apology. If the messengers found out that the situation was not good, then they could only escape back to the mountains in the night. Sinsing was still unwilling to give up after the defeat. He sent people to the east, south, and north of the mercenary camp to investigate. The results were disheartening. Not only were there traps, trenches, sentry towers, and antlers, but there was also a tunnel connecting the north to the camp next to it, so they could get support at any time. Only then did he give up and withdraw his people, waiting for the arrival of Akapiru. After waiting for a long time, Akapiru finally arrived with his army. After all, 6,000 troops were sent out to chase after the Turis, and it was not easy to gather these warriors who were excited from killing again. The Grimentum warriors killed all the scattered soldiers outside the city of Turis. Some of them even crossed the moat and came to the city of Turis, only to be attacked by the angry Turis on the city wall with arrows, javelins, and stones. Only then did they calm down a little. Seeing this, Akapiru also temporarily gave up on taking down the city of Turis in one fell swoop. He could only regroup his troops and rush to meet with the other troop. But when he saw that most of the Picassus warriors were injured and dispirited, he could not help but be shocked and quickly asked for the reason. Sinsing told him about how his people fought bravely, and how the mercenaries were very despicable and cunning and so on. At the same time, he angrily accused the Zigs of being passive and not fighting, and even killing the Lucanians during the battle. The great leader of Zig City, Sidorum, did not expect Sinsing to complain first. He immediately became anxious and shouted that he was wronged. He also angrily defended himself. Great leader Akapiru, you have to know that it's not that I don't want to fight with all my strength, but it's that great leader Sinsing is too confident. He thinks that the bravery of the Picassus warriors alone is enough to defeat the left wing of the Greeks, so he arranged the Zig's warriors in the rear. On the contrary, when the front of the Picassus army was about to collapse, it was our Zig's warriors who attacked bravely and helped Picassus stabilize the battle, saving our right wing. So, our Zig's warriors have made a great contribution to the victory of this battle. As for killing and injuring the Picassus warriors, it's because the defeated soldiers of Picassus were attacking the formation of the right wing. In order to prevent defeat and at the same time force them to fight again, we had no choice but to make this choice. In fact, not many of the Picassus warriors were really injured. It was because of this urgent method that the right wing finally defeated the enemy. And when we attacked the Greek camp, our Zig's warriors also lost hundreds of people. You're talking nonsense. You're talking nonsense. If it wasn't for the fact that you broody people were unwilling to fight at the beginning, how could we have fought so hard? Just now, when we attacked the Greek camp, your Zigs were also the last to arrive. Sinsing roared angrily, Ninath, tell everyone, how many of our warriors have been killed and injured by the Zigs? Ninath hesitated for a moment. Under his father's intense gaze, he said hesitantly, About 150 people, all of them were stabbed by spears in the back. Chapter 90. Both Sinsing and Sidorum cast their hopeful eyes on Akapiru. Akapiru watched all this, and he knew very well that the Whigs did not fight with all their strength. After all, they were the Brudi, not the Lucaria. Of course, what Sidorum said might be the truth. They had saved the right wing and contributed to the victory of the battle. He knew Sinsing very well. It was his style to bully the weak and fear the strong. It was not surprising that he had such a performance. It was his duty as the leader of the alliance to reward merit and punish mistakes, but he could not really follow the alliance agreement. Picassus was the most important ally of the Grimentum. It was because of his support that the Grimentum was strong today. Moreover, Picassus was also a powerful tribal alliance in Lucania municipality. Criticizing or even punishing the great leader of Picassus in front of the Brudi would definitely cause dissatisfaction in Picassus, and thus cause the Lucania tribal alliance to be divided. The area where the Brudi lived bordered the southern part of Lucania. The tribes there were independent and not unified, so they were relatively weak. They were the next target of the Grimentum's conquest after defeating the Turii and occupying the Sabari plain. Whig was the closest Brudi city to the Lucaria territory. Its voluntary surrender, under the coercion of the Lucania tribal alliance, gave the Grimentum a springboard to enter the Brudi territory. Therefore, they could not be too harsh on it, but they could not let it be confused because the Lucanians were the masters, and the Brudi were destined to be enslaved. After making up his mind, he slowly said, "It is the result of everyone's joint efforts that we can win this battle. When we occupy this place, I will give each of you rich spoils of war according to your contributions." But his sharp eyes made Sidorum's heart tremble. As an ally, killing a comrade who fought side by side with you is an ugly act of breaking a promise. Even the gods will punish you. Therefore, Vigor City had to pay a fine that would satisfy Picassus to compensate for their losses. At the same time, offer the lives of the same number of Vigo warriors as a sacrifice. What? When the Vigo warriors heard this, they all exploded and shouted angrily. The Grimentum and Picassus warriors immediately surrounded them. "Sidorum, do you agree or disagree with my decision?" Akapiru stared coldly at the leader of Vigor City. Sidorum lowered his head and clenched his fists. His face was pale, and his forehead was covered with sweat. He remained silent. "Great leader, you can't agree to it. The Lucanians have humiliated us like this, and we will not stand for it. Let's go back." Saru shouted angrily. "Yes, let's go back. Leader, let's go back." The Wigger warriors were furious. "Go back." Sinsing sneered and said to Akapirus, "You see, the Brudi people are really unreliable. They want to quit the alliance they swore to the gods so quickly. If that's the case, why don't?" Hearing this, Sidorum was shocked. He raised his head abruptly and saw the ferocious sneer on Sinsing's face and the cold expression of Akapirus. He looked around. The Lucanians raised their shields and spears and surrounded his people. Although the Vigo warriors struggled with all their might, they were too few in number. They only wore leather armor and did not have bronze shields. They only had one spear. Their equipment was too simple. Sidorum's nails dug deep into his palms. He squeezed out a sentence with difficulty. I agree, great leader." The sorrowful cries of the Vigo warriors were like a big hammer, hammering on Sidorum's already extremely fragile heart. He staggered a few steps and fell to the ground. "Eudril will be in charge of supervising the execution of the punishment," Akapirus said. He was worried that Sinsing would agitate the Brudi people again and cause a riot, so he chose to be neutral. "Okay." Eudril, the great leader of Nudum, replied. "When we occupy this place, I will allocate a piece of land in the Sabari plain for Sidorum and your people to graze cattle and sheep according to the contributions of Vigo City. It is much more fertile than the land of the Brudi." After Akapirus gave the punishment, he gave Vigo City a sweet reward. "Thank you, great leader." Sidorum endured the pain and thanked him. Echepirus did not wait for Sinsing to speak and asked kindly, Ninath, my dear child, how are your injuries? Ninath endured the pain and straightened his chest. Great leader, I'm fine. They are just flesh wounds. That's good. You have to protect yourself. I don't want my dear daughter to become a widow at such a young age. I'm still waiting to hold my grandson. Echepirus laughed loudly, and the warriors around him also laughed along, making Ninath a little embarrassed and shy. Sinsing breathed a sigh of relief. Since Echepirus still valued Ninath, his promise to Picasus would not change because of this setback. What Lucania's #1 warrior? To be so embarrassed by the Greeks who outnumber you so much, what a disgrace to the Lucanians! There was sarcasm in the warrior's laughter. Ninath looked in the direction of the voice. It turned out to be Sevilla, the leader of a tribe in Grimentum. He had once proposed to Echepirus' daughter, but the great leader married his daughter to Ninath for the sake of the tribe's interests. Since then, Sevilla had not been nice to him. Not to be outdone, Ninath said. If you have the ability, then go ahead and attack. I don't believe you can take down this camp. Well, I'll show you the power of us Grimentum warriors. Sevilla was provoked and did not decline. He turned around and shouted, Brothers, enough, Sevilla! Echepirus' deep and majestic voice immediately stopped the young leader's impulse. Let's go back to camp. As soon as his voice fell, Sinsing shouted first, Go back now? Aren't we going to continue to attack this camp? Echepirus looked up at the sky and said, It's almost dusk, and the warriors are very tired. We have killed the last Turii militia, and they are powerless to stop us Lucanians from taking root in this land. When we go back, we will take care of the wounded, recover our strength, and prepare the tools. Tomorrow we will build a city here, a city of Lucania. Echepirus' voice became a little excited. These mercenaries are not worth worrying about at all. As long as they dare to come out, we will defeat them. If they don't come out, we can lock them up so that they can't get the support of the Turii, and they will naturally be finished. As for the reinforcements from Tarentum, I heard that the relationship between Tarentum and the Messapi is tense, and they will not stay here for long. The people around were thoughtful. Eudril asked, Echepirus, are we not going to Amendola? We will go tomorrow. Echepirus glanced at Sinsing. Although on the surface he did not take the mercenaries seriously, in fact, the combat power of this team surprised him a little. The tribe that had captured Amendola did not join the Lucanian tribal coalition as per his orders. If he led the army at this moment, Amendola was likely to refuse to open the gate. Although his forces were more than 10 times that of the other party, siege was not the Lucanians' forte. Moreover, it was a mountain city. If they could not capture it quickly, at night, the warriors would be extremely tired and had no food. Behind them, there was the threat of mercenaries and Tarentum reinforcements, and there was a group of unstable Zwegs in the team. They were afraid that something unexpected would happen. There was no need for the Lucania tribe's allied forces to take this risk when they were confident of winning. If the leader of that small tribe in Amendola is smart, they should escape to the mountains tonight like last time. Otherwise, I'll let them know who's in charge of the Lucania region tomorrow. Echepirus sneered with a bloodthirsty smile on his face. Chapter 91. The Lucarians had retreated. Amid the cheers of the soldiers, Felicius came to the main tent of the military camp to meet the Devers. However, he saw that the Devers were engrossed in drawing something on the ground with a wooden stick. Sometimes they raised their heads in contemplation, and sometimes they paced back and forth anxiously. They were completely unaware of the movements outside. Felicius called out a few times, but seeing no response, he simply stood at the side and watched quietly. He craned his head to see what the Devers were drawing. The pattern on the ground was crude and messy. He could barely make out that it was a topographic map of the surroundings of Turii, the Kruti River and its tributary, the Kosini River. The square at the confluence of the two rivers should represent the city of Turii. What did this thin line refer to? It was connected to the Cosini River. Could it be the Tino River? And what did these dots and circles beside the Tino River represent? Just as he was deep in thought, he heard the Devers shout in a strange language. He quickly raised his head and saw that the Devers were extremely agitated, their faces flushed. Could it be that he was talking to Pluto just now? Felicius recalled some rumors, and his heart skipped a beat. Felicius, you've come at the right time. Immediately inform all the captains and squad leaders to come to my tent for a meeting, the Devers suddenly said. Their unquestionable and unyielding tone shocked Felicius. After Felicius left, the Devers took another deep look at the pattern on the ground. Once again, he used a firm tone to repeat what he had just said. Success or failure, it all depends on this battle. I'm betting. He stretched out his leg and forcefully wiped the pattern off the ground. Resolutely, he sat on the wooden chair in the middle of the tent. While waiting for his nervous and agitated emotions to calm down, he was also waiting for the arrival of his subordinate. When this camp was being built, the Devers had taken into account the needs of the battle and expanded the tent. Even so, with dozens of team officers standing in the tent, the space was still very tight. But no one cared about this. If the battle failed, where would the mercenaries go? Previously, because they had to fight, they did not have the time to think about it. Now, every team officer was feeling uneasy, so they all looked at Devers, hoping that this leader, who had led them out of trouble time and time again and constantly created miracles, could point them in the right direction. Brothers, the Devers spoke. We have lost. The Lucarians may have retreated, but they would come again tomorrow. The Lucarians had long wanted to occupy the fertile Zubari plain. For this reason, they launched 2 major battles against the Turris and paid a huge price to defeat the Turris. Finally, they managed to inflict heavy losses on the Turris and force them to hole up in their cities. They would never give up on the Zubari plain. So, what should we do? Devers looked around at the crowd with a solemn expression, but he didn't want them to argue about anything at this time. Because time was tight, he continued, although I haven't said it publicly, I'm afraid you all already know, because you all have been working hard for it. That's right, Amendola is my target. This is the place I have chosen for our mercenaries in Greece. This is our future home. Most of the team officers looked calm, and only a few of them looked surprised. However, if the Lucanians occupy the Zubari plain, even if we take Amendola, we will become their main target. Because we have too few people, and we are the weakest, and we have a grudge against them. Even if we defeat them again like today, as long as they are here, they will always be a huge threat to us. What should we do? The Devers asked for the second time. Of course, we have to defeat them. Someone shouted in the silence. It was Matonis's voice. That's right. The Lucanians are actually not as strong as the Turris say. As long as we can disperse them, we can defeat them. Amintas also said loudly. Even when facing an enemy 10 times their size, these 2 brave officers could still fearlessly charge forward. However, Capys, Alexis, Felicius, and the others obviously did not agree with them and were about to refute. The Devers laughed and said, Well said, we have to attack the Lucanians, but not to attack them when they are dispersed, but to annihilate them in one fell swoop. That's the only way we can settle down in Amendola with peace of mind. That's the only way we can deter Tulii and the other forces from obstructing us. That's the only way we can freely sow wheat and graze cattle and sheep. Annihilate the Lucanians? Everyone was stunned. Chief, we only have 2,000 people. Even if we surround them, we can't do it. How are we going to annihilate the Lucanians who have 10,000 people? Felicius's words echoed the doubts of all the officers. It's not just us, there are reinforcements from Tarentum and Dracos's mercenaries. Even if we include them, we only have 6,000 people. The Lucanians have 15 to 16,000 people, more than twice our number. Capus shook his head and said, Are the reinforcements from Tarentum and those mercenaries willing to attack the Lucanians? Antonios asked a key question. They don't know yet, but I'm confident that we can convince them soon. The Devers looked at everyone confidently. Seeing that they were still full of doubts, he said loudly, Brothers, do you remember what I said before? The victory of a war is not decided by numbers. It depends on the quality of the soldiers, the level of morale, and the quality of their weapons. The most important thing is to come up with a feasible and meticulous plan. Let us lead the enemy by the nose, suppress the enemy's strengths, and play to our strengths. Only then can we achieve the final victory. Everyone was deep in thought. Amyntas urged impatiently, Chief Devers, quickly tell us your plan. Assists, go get the tourist map, the Devers shouted. The assists immediately brought over the map that had been carefully drawn on parchment after repeated surveys a few days ago. The Devers spread the map on the wooden table, and everyone immediately gathered around. Everyone, please take a look. This is the Lucanians' camp, and this is the Tino River. The Devers pointed at the points and lines on the map and slowly explained the attack plan that they had been brewing in detail. Everyone listened carefully and pondered at the same time. When the Devers finished, there was silence in the tent. Then, they began to whisper in twos and threes. The Devers waited quietly for a while and said, Brothers, is this plan feasible? Chief. Alexis praised sincerely, I've never seen such a wonderful idea. It's a genius plan. Alexis is right. If we execute this plan, not only will the enemy's advantage in numbers be suppressed, but it will also make it easier for us to use the power of our attacks. Chief, as expected of our chief, the great commander, the blessed of Hades. For a moment there was a tide of flattery. The Devers said solemnly, Now is not the time to say nice things. This is a crucial moment that concerns our survival. Tell us what you think. We need to gather everyone's wisdom to overcome the difficulties and obtain victory. Everyone looked at each other. Alexis coughed a few times, and her expression became serious. She was the first to speak, Chief. According to your plan, the first thing we need to solve is the problem of how to lure the enemy. After an intense discussion, the battle plan was finally roughly established, and the atmosphere in the tent became lively. The Devers said loudly, Brothers, the battle is about to begin. Go back and tell the soldiers, tell them the truth that we have been hiding. This battle isn't for Tulii, nor is it for us, the team's officers. It's for themselves, for the land that all of us have been dreaming of. Hades will protect us. Chapter 92. When Archita walked into the expeditionary army camp, cheers came from every tent he passed. The air was filled with excitement and happiness. Even he, who had a heavy heart, was infected. He could not help but sigh in his heart. This mercenary army is indeed a battle-hardened powerhouse that gave Persia headaches. During the day, he had seen with his own eyes how these mercenaries had used novel tactics and fierce attacks against the Lucanians. It was even more commendable that they could still maintain such high morale after the defeat of the battle. Archita's desire to see the Devers immediately became stronger. As soon as he arrived outside the tent, the young man whom he had a good impression of came out to greet him. The first thing he said was, General Archita, we are preparing to attack the Lucanian tribal coalition tomorrow. We hope to receive help from the Tarentum reinforcements. Aketa couldn't believe his ears. You mean you want to attack the Lucania tribal coalition? Yes. It's the 15,000 Lucanian tribal coalition in the west and not the Lucanians in Amendalara? Archita asked again with uncertainty. Yes, it's the Lucanian tribal coalition in the west. The Devers nodded heavily. After Archita got the affirmative answer, he stared at the Devers for a while and barely suppressed his excitement. He said, What are you going to do? Come, let's talk inside the tent. The Devers hurriedly led Archita into the tent. They came to the map laid out and explained their plan in detail. Archita held his chin with his hand and pondered for a long time before slowly saying, "I have to say that this is a very bold plan. It almost uses the military force to the extreme, and it also has a certain degree of feasibility. It's very tempting to me. Then, will the Tarantum reinforcements join?" The Devers asked. Archita was silent and the Devers were not in a hurry. After a long silence, Archita saw that the Devers were still calm and could not help but say, "It seems that you are certain that I will agree. I heard that Heraclea is an ally of Tarantum. If we win tomorrow, Tarantum will no longer have to worry about the problem in the west and can focus on dealing with the Masapi," the Devers said slowly. Actually, his words were quite polite. Heraclea was not just an ally of Tarantum. It was actually a subsidiary controlled by Tarantum. 20 years ago, the person in power was not even an immigrant of Tarantum, but someone directly appointed by Tarantum. Although it was not almost a subsidiary state of Tarantum like it was in the past, Tarantum still had a strong influence on Heraclea. It regarded Heraclea as its western barrier. If the Lucanians occupied the Sabari Plain and Amendalara, which was next to Heraclea, the threat to Heraclea would be too great. It might even threaten Metapontum, which was further north. This was also an important reason why Tarantum had sent reinforcements. Asita finally nodded. "The people of Tarantum are happy to fight alongside the Greek warriors in the expedition to Persia. That's great. It's because of the Tarantum reinforcements led by you, Asita, that I dare to propose this plan because your combat power is also very strong," the Devers said sincerely. After the two discussed the details, Asita suddenly said, "Devers, I have a suggestion that I hope you will consider." "Please say it." The Devers saw his serious expression and was taken aback. "Regardless of victory or defeat in the next battle, I sincerely invite you to become a citizen of Tarantum. I will also fully recommend you to the Senate in the hope that you will take up an important administrative position." Asita solemnly made a promise. The Devers did not expect Asita to make such a request, which caught him off guard. Well, I heard that it's very difficult for a foreigner to become a citizen of a large city-state. Yes. Asita nodded frankly, but then he changed the topic. "However, people with extraordinary talents like you will be warmly invited in any city-state in Greece. After all, this is not Athens, it's a colonial city. The key is that they must have the foresight to discover talents." Asita proudly pointed to his eyes. "Just me, excluding my brothers?" The Devers thought of a reason to refuse. With so many people joining Tarantum, it's not something that the Archons or the Senate can decide. It needs to be decided by collective voting in a citizens' assembly, which is very difficult. Asita said awkwardly, "Thank you for your invitation. After tomorrow's battle, I will seriously consider this issue." The Devers pretended to be serious. Regarding the Devers' invitation, Adrianx, Sesta, and even Dracos came. The Devers told them his plan, and the three were shocked. In today's battle, they did not suffer as light losses as the Tarantum reinforcements and the Devers mercenaries. The number of casualties was more than 400, especially Draco's mercenaries. For them who only had 2,000 people, it could be said to be a heavy blow. If they agreed to the Devers' request, the casualties would probably be even higher, so Adrianx and Sesta were a little hesitant. "Leader Devers, I'm willing to participate in tomorrow's battle," Dracos, who had been depressed, suddenly said, surprising the other two. "The Lucanians are nothing to be afraid of. It's just that the Talii have dragged me down today. I believe that if I fight with you tomorrow, I'll definitely make them taste defeat," Dracos said unwillingly. The Devers did not expect Dracos, whom they had fought before, to be the first to agree. It made them look at the big leader's desire to fight and tenacity in a new light. Seeing that the other two were still hesitating, he immediately said, "The attack on the Lucanians is not for the pitiful tourists' pay. After we defeat them, we will take back Amendalar and become the master of that place. The words of the Devers shocked the three again. Are you sure you can take down Amendalar? Sesta asked in surprise. We have attacked many cities in Persia. A small mountain city is really not a problem, the Devers said confidently. When the time comes, we will invite you to become citizens of Amendalar, obtain the land there, and put down a foundation in the rich Greece. Of course, if you only want to return to the war-torn and barren Ionia, just pretend that I didn't say anything. Are you serious? You will really let us get the land? Adrianx stammered. Of course, this is a decision that all of us have made together, the Devers said with a straight face. But, Adrianx slightly calmed down and asked, will Turris and Tarantum object? Turris is heavily injured. They don't have the ability to object even if they want to. The Devers smiled contemptuously. As for Tarantum, maybe they will be happy that we are doing this because we have the ability to defend Amendalar and protect the western border of Tarantum from the invasion of the mountain tribes. The three of them looked at each other and said in unison, we are willing to join you. That's great, the Devers said happily. Now we are a family. Let us fight for our own future together. After the four of them finished discussing the details of the plan, the Devers reminded them to keep it a secret and not let the people of Tarantum know about it for the time being. After sending the three of them off, the Devers prepared to let the freedmen who were returning to Turris go back and ask Buckos to quickly come to the camp. There was an urgent matter to discuss. Unexpectedly, a guard came in and reported, Buckos is already outside the camp, requesting to see you. The Devers were surprised and immediately thought of the urgent need that the Turris' city hall and parliament had for them. As expected, the moment Buckos entered the tent, he asked impatiently, Chief Devers, are you still going to continue with the original agreement? Chapter 93. How can we do that? That's fine. You've sworn to the gods. Buckos pleaded anxiously, Chief Devers, please. Let your soldiers stay and help Turin. Pay. I'll double your pay. You lack weapons. Turin has a lot of them. I'll bring them to you right now. You've seen the battle today. Turin lost more than 2,000 men. We really don't have anyone left. Buckos cried and almost knelt down. However, the Devers' expression turned cold. Buckos hurriedly said, Let me think again. Let me think again. Although there are no people in Tulii, there are enough slaves to mine copper and stone. They are all young and strong men, and they are relatively strong. You can have as much as you want. The Devers rubbed his chin and thought for a while before saying reluctantly, All right, but I don't have food to feed these slaves. Turin has enough food. I'll give you as much as you want. As long as the Devers agreed to stay, Buckos would try his best to fulfill any request. That night, all of Turin was busy. In order to survive, the people endured their grief and drove hundreds of cargo ships filled with weapons, food, slaves, and tents, because the reinforcements from Tarantum refused to enter the city and were willing to stay in the mercenary camp. They had to prepare tents for them. To the simple dock at the mouth of the river, the Devers ordered Merces to lead his men in the supply camp to receive the goods and let the soldiers rest early to recover their energy. At dawn, the mercenaries in front of the Devers' camp were already in formation. The Devers patrolled in front of them, and their high spirits made the Devers nod continuously. Matones, are you ready? The Devers could not help but ask as they looked at their old comrade who was eager to fight. I can't wait, Matones shouted. Later, there will be enemies for you to fight. On average, each of us has to kill 3 people from the other side to ensure victory. Are you confident? The Devers asked with a smile. Yes. The shouts of the soldiers around him were mixed with Matones' unwillingness. 3 of you aren't enough for me to kill. Devers laughed and jumped onto the war horse pulled by a sis. He came to the front of the army and faced countless excited and hopeful eyes. He shouted, Brothers, I see hope in your eyes. After today's battle, I hope you can turn this hope into reality. Hades will protect you. Victory! 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 Amidst the endless cheers, the Devers solemnly said to Felicius, I await your good news. Don't worry, leader. With Hades' protection, we will succeed, Felicius said excitedly. Devers took a deep breath as he watched the mercenaries disappear into the morning mist. He knew that the war horse that would decide his fate was about to begin. Yi-Shi returned to the camp. Begin our preparations, he shouted in a loud, forceful and excited voice. Yes. The assist's reply was equally powerful. Hey, did you hear that? I think there's an army marching, a sentry on the Turii wall reminded his comrade. Could it be that the Lucanians are here to attack us? The other sentinel exclaimed in panic when he heard the commotion. Quick, sound the alarm and inform the citizens. The sentry ran to the tower. However, when the Turii's militia reached the wall, it was dead silent outside. Faced with the fog, the cavalrymen refused to go out to investigate, so they could only wait for the fog to disperse. In the morning, the sun had risen to the sky, and the fog had dissipated. The sound of the horn echoed throughout the Lucanians' camp, and the soldiers began to prepare to march to the Zubari plain. At that moment, a sentry rushed into the camp. Enemies are coming! Enemies are coming! Enemies dare to attack our camp? The Lucanian soldiers looked curiously out of the camp. 200 heavily armed Greek heavy infantry appeared outside the camp. Under the watchful eyes of tens of thousands of people, they calmly stopped 100 meters away from the camp and began to throw some round objects into the camp. When the objects fell to the ground, the soldiers realized that they were the heads of the Lucanian soldiers who had died in the mercenary camp. Due to fear of increasing casualties, the Lucanian soldiers did not dare to take away the bodies of their comrades from the trap outside the Devers camp yesterday. Their ears were cut and their eyes gouged out. They died a miserable death. When the soldiers' anger was ignited, the Greek soldiers outside the camp lifted their battle skirts and cursed while peeing. The Lucanian soldiers were furious. They broke through their leader's obstruction, and thousands of them rushed out of the camp and pounced on the Greek soldiers fiercely. The Greek soldiers immediately turned around and fled. After the Lucanian soldiers circled around the ridge, they were shocked to find nearly 2,000 Greek soldiers waiting in formation in front of them. It was too late to dodge. A round of javelins immediately caused the Lucanian soldiers to fall, and then a powerful charge completely extinguished the fighting spirit of the soldiers. Then, the Greek soldiers began to chase them. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the Greek soldiers quickly knocked down the fleeing Lucanian soldiers one by one, and then stabbed the fallen soldiers a few more times to ensure their death. This cruel way of killing and the screams of their people made the Lucanian soldiers and leaders who witnessed all this in the camp unable to hold back their anger. However, they were intimidated by the number and ferocity of the other party, so they began to look for the great leader of the Grimentum to fight. Before Akapiru could reply, Ninath shouted, I know them. They are the damned mercenaries who fought with us yesterday. Akapiru's eyes widened. Child, are you sure? I won't make a mistake even if you beat me to death. Ninath looked like he had suffered a great deal. Great leader, let me lead 3,000 soldiers to repel them and avenge the warriors of Pegasus. Seville stepped forward and asked for battle. Ninath glared at him and also stepped forward to ask for battle. Akapiru said loudly, These Greek mercenaries dare to leave the camp and harass us. That's just right, let's destroy them all here again so that we don't have to attack their camp again. The more Akapiru spoke, the more excited he became. Immediately blow the horn to attack, and all troops line up outside the camp. After defeating them, take advantage of the situation and march into the Zubari plain. The leaders were equally excited and agreed in unison. Only the great leader of Vigo City, Sidorum, remained silent. Akapiru glanced at him and said in a deep voice, Sidorum, do you have any doubts about my decision? Sidorum smiled bitterly. Great leader, I absolutely obey orders. It's just that, after last night, the soldiers of Vigo City were unwilling, refused to go to the battlefield again. There's such a thing. Akapiru's eyes widened. The soldiers said, if you go to the battlefield and get killed by the enemy, when you come back, you'll be killed by your own people. Since you're going to be killed anyway, it's better to lie in the camp and let your own people kill you. At least it won't be so tiring. No matter how I tried to persuade them, they didn't listen. Sidorum lowered his head, but he spoke very fluently. Akapiru, the people of Vigo are not listening to orders. They must be up to no good. We must capture them immediately. Sinsing jumped out and shouted, pointing at Sidorum. Sidorum's expression changed slightly. Akapiru interrupted Sinsing. Well, since the warriors of Vigo are unwilling to fight, then stay and guard the camp. Sidorum breathed a sigh of relief. Before Sinsing could say anything, Akapiru waved his hand and said impatiently, the warriors of Pegasus also suffered heavy casualties yesterday, so they will also stay and guard the camp with the warriors of Vigo City. After we defeat the Greeks, you will then transport cattle, sheep, tents, equipment and all camp supplies to the Zubari Plain. Sinsing stopped making a fuss. He gladly accepted the order and even stopped his son Ninatha's opposition. But this did not reduce Akapiru's resentment towards him. Originally, after returning to the camp yesterday, Akapiru intended to let Sidorum kill a few dozen seriously injured Vigo people. But Sinsing insisted on killing 150 Vigo warriors as a sacrifice. This obviously made the people of Vigo unhappy. Looking at the expressionless Sidorum, Akapiru knew that he should seriously consider the problem of Vigo City next. But now the Zubari Plain was his primary goal, so he could only let Pegasus monitor these foreigners for the time being. Chapter 94. The Greeks also stopped their pursuit, began to gather their troops, and slowly moved forward. Apart from the Pegasus and Vigo warriors, as well as the injured warriors from the other three cities, there were more than 9,000 troops in formation. From south to north, the formation was about a few miles long. They belonged to the tribes under Grimentum, Nudum, and Laos, so the formation was slow. In front of the behemoth of the Lucaria tribal coalition, the Greek mercenaries of only 2,000 people appeared too weak. However, when they slowly moved to 100 meters away from the enemy's formation, they suddenly accelerated to the left. Before the Lucanian leaders could react, the Greek army had already approached the right flank of the allied army. The Lucanian soldiers who were still in a disorderly formation watched in horror as the Greek army threw javelins at them, and then launched a fierce attack on them. In the blink of an eye, the right side of the Lucanian coalition army collapsed. The despicable Greeks betrayed their trust and attacked without waiting for us to finish our formation. Sevilla cursed angrily. Akapiru realized that he had made a mistake. Sending a huge army to face the small and capable Greek army was like a fierce bull facing a nimble mouse, bloated and not efficient. Sound the horn, let the soldiers attack immediately. While the Greek army continued to attack the left side along the right side of the right, Akapiru quickly gave an order. Surround them. Don't let them escape. At the same time, the other leaders also gave similar orders. The Lucanian warriors, who were freed from their restraints, quickly rushed toward the Greek army like hounds that had let loose. They wanted to tear this group of Greeks, who had repeatedly made fun of them, humiliated them, and made them hate the most, into pieces. The Greek army immediately turned and ran east. As they ran, they threw away their shields, bayonets, and swords to ensure that they would not be caught by the Lucarians who ran like crazy. The Greeks ran desperately in front, and the Lucanian coalition army chased after them. Gradually, they formed a dense line of several miles long. The Greeks turned over the ridge, and followed the gradual descent of the mountain to the east. After they had run about 10 leagues, the soldiers were a little out of breath, and when they looked back, the Lucarians were still at their heels. At this time, the Greeks left the mountain road and approached the Tino River. Then, they ran down the gentle slope and came to the large riverbank on the other side of the famous hot spring swamp. Although the soil here was moist and soft, and a foot could pick up a piece of soil, the terrain was flat. Compared to the uneven, rocky mountain road, it was easier to run and faster. The Lucarians, of course, followed them down the river, or they would have lost the Greek. "Brothers, hold on a little longer. We're almost there." Felicius, who was running at the front, was panting as he encouraged the soldiers around him with a hoarse voice. In fact, he was also encouraging himself. As a veteran who was over 40 years old, this long run had exhausted all of his energy. When the Greeks had reached the end of the river and were crossing the gentle slope, the Lucanians were hot on their heels, but just as they were about to set foot on the top of the slope, they saw above them rows of heavily armed Greek infantry, already in position, advancing to meet them. "There's an ambush!" Before the soldier at the front could shout, the spear of the Greek army pierced through his chest. The Lucanian soldiers, who were already exhausted from running, had completely lost the ability to dodge. Under the countless spears of the Greek heavy infantry, they fell down one by one like dumplings falling into a pot. The soldiers at the back did not know what was happening in front of them and were still running forward, at this time, behind the Tarentum reinforcements who were in charge of the frontal interception. The Devers mercenaries who were in charge of baiting the enemy were eating warm bread and drinking hot water. The women and slaves of the supply camp brought new round shields, spears, and swords, and quickly equipped each soldier. The mercenaries knew that their time was tight. They had to replenish their food and water as soon as possible and then rush forward as fast as possible to complete the encirclement. Mercies also knew that his time was tight. After completing the replenishment of the mercenaries, he had to bring the fully armed guards of the supply camp, the slaves from the city of Turris, and dozens of slave captains who were in charge of commanding them. There were about 1,000 people in total, including more than a dozen pack carts, to the narrow area in front of the mountain path to establish a defensive line and block the reinforcements of the Lucanian army. Drax, Adrianx, and Cesta led about 1,500 mercenaries to lie in ambush on the side of the river that was more than 2 miles long. Their defensive line was relatively weak. Fortunately, there were about 700 light shield-bearers and light infantrymen behind them. There were also 700 armed mine slaves behind them. And in between the two teams were the Devers and their guards. "Leader!" Assists rushed over on horseback and said excitedly, "Our team has begun to move quickly towards the mountain path to the west." The Devers nodded and tried to suppress the excitement and nervousness in his heart. The initial operation of luring the enemy could be said to be effective. Looking at the densely packed enemy below, there were at least 8,000 to 9,000 people. More than half of the Lucanian army's forces were gathered here. Excluding the warriors who were injured yesterday, the enemy camp was estimated to have no more than 5,000 people. After wiping out the enemy in front of them, the Lucarians would no longer have the ability to stir up trouble in the Zubari plain. They should take advantage of the fact that the enemy on the river bank was disorganized to launch an attack and take them down as soon as possible. "Light infantrymen, attack!" The Devers ordered decisively. After receiving the order, Epthenis and Xpit led the light shield-bearers to pass through the mercenaries in front of them. Alpines ordered the stone throwers and archers to start loading the ammunition. The front was blocked, but the Lucanian warriors behind were still rushing forward due to inertia. Soon, countless Lucaria warriors crowded together, gathering at the bottom of the river bank that was about half a mile wide and 2 miles long. Many of them had already sensed that something was wrong, and were shouting at each other anxiously. At this time, countless Greek soldiers appeared on the side slope. "Enemy! We've fallen into an ambush!" Accompanied by the panicked shouts of the warriors, javelins, arrows, and flying stones poured down. The soldiers were crowded, and most of them had thrown away their shields, helmets, and even their breastplates to make it easier for them to chase after the enemy. In the absence of protection, the light infantrymen of the mercenary army didn't need to aim. Every javelin, every stone, and every arrow could hit their target easily. Retreat. The terrified warriors wanted to escape. However, there were more than 9,000 people in the crowded and narrow space. Some of them were dodging arrows and flying stones, some wanted to retreat, and some wanted to kill the Greeks in front of them in anger. They wanted to kill their way out. Everyone had their own ideas. They were like headless flies bumping into each other. However, the entire troop was in chaos and disorganized. It was quite difficult for them to complete a smooth retreat. On the contrary, it was easier to cause a disaster of being trampled on. In the face of death, the terrified warriors unconsciously pushed down the clansmen in front of them, and in the blink of an eye, they died silently under the feet of countless people. The leaders and warriors of the various tribes were extremely anxious when they saw this situation. However, in the turbulent and noisy crowd, any shouts or attempts to stop them were futile. Unfortunately, the buglers of the Allied forces were far behind the troops, and they could not reach them. Kill. Follow me and kill. Seville squeezed through the panicked clansmen with his strong body. With a spear in hand, he roared and glared angrily at the gentle slope on the side of the river bank. His risky action attracted the attention of both sides, and reminded the panicked warriors who were dodging the rain of arrows. Some of the warriors began to follow him, braving the enemy's long-range attacks and running up the slope. Chapter 95. Sevilla staggered a few steps back and wanted to throw the spear in his hand to fight back, but his already tired body was hit hard again. Exhausted, he fell down and slid down the slope. Sevilla's death didn't scare the rest of the warriors. The belief that they were going to live gave them temporary courage and strength. Warriors fell one after another, but there was an endless stream of warriors who rushed forward. The Lucanian warriors were approaching the top of the slope. The brass horns sounded in a timely and urgent manner. The light shield-bearers quickly retreated from the gaps between the mercenary heavy infantrymen. The heavy infantrymen stepped forward and formed a long and thin dense square formation. They stood on the top of the slope and wanted to use the long steel wall to destroy the enemy's hope of escaping. The light infantrymen behind them ignored the numbness in their arms and continued to shoot javelins, arrows, and flying stones, making them pass the heavy infantrymen in a perfect arc and fall down the slope. They continued to kill the enemies behind them and prevent them from forming a continuous attack. The slaves at the back had already brought bundles of arrows and javelins for the light infantrymen to replenish their long-range weapons. Dracos stood at the forefront of the line of defense, facing the enemies who were gradually beginning to rush up the slope. Not only did he not feel nervous or afraid, but he was full of fighting spirit. Brothers, drive the enemy down. Roar! The soldiers were influenced by him. They raised their shields and spears and roared in unison. As the great leader of the Grimentum and the leader of the Lucanian tribal coalition, Acapairu, who was over 50 years old, certainly could not impulsively throw himself into the pursuit like the young warriors. He did not chase. There were 400 Grimentum warriors who were responsible for his safety. Of course, they would not leave him behind to pursue the enemy alone. Nudum and Laos were in the same situation. The three teams combined had about 700 warriors. After they met up, they moved forward at a faster speed. When they were about to reach the hot spring swamp, they heard the deafening sound of fighting and screams in front of them. The faces of the great leaders changed. "Hurry up and get there," Acapairu hurriedly ordered. The fast-moving team encountered the Devers mercenaries, who were also rushing over to complete the encirclement. When Felicius saw the enemy on the mountain path, his heart skipped a beat. Fortunately, he was experienced and quickly made his own arrangement. The 1st, 2nd, and 3rd companies were under Capus's command to block the enemies who were surrounded. The 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th companies would follow him to attack the enemies in front. At the same time, Felicius called for a messenger. "Quickly inform Mercius, and get him to bring the slaves here quickly." Seeing that the Greeks dared to divide their forces in the face of his approach, Acapirus became more and more uneasy. Would these cowardly Greeks dare to do this if they had nothing more urgent to do? He immediately gave the order, attack with full force. The two fully armed teams were all elites of their own, but they didn't even get into formation or spread out before they collided with each other. Capys led the army to the west of the river bank and ran into the Lucaria warriors who had just climbed out of the slope and were still in a state of shock. They were immediately beaten up, leaving dozens of bodies rolling down the slope. The mercenaries immediately blocked the gap. Now, to the east of the river bank were Tarantum's reinforcements, to the north were Draco's mercenaries, all the light infantry and slave soldiers, to the west were the heavy infantry of the Devers mercenaries, and to the south were the hot spring swamps and the Tino River that flooded with spring rain. More than 9,000 Lucanian tribal coalition forces were surrounded in a narrow low-lying area about 2 miles long and half a mile wide, and the total force of the encirclement was only about 7,000, including the slave soldiers. Their blockade line was weak, especially on the west side, where there were only 600 Devers mercenaries, almost a single line of infantry. Draco's mercenaries, which extended to the north, were like dumplings with thin skin and many fillings, in danger of being squeezed at any time. Fortunately, the Lucanians in the encirclement were temporarily chaotic and disorganized, like headless flies bumping around, unable to form a joint force. In the Devers plan, the long-range firepower of the light infantry was the main factor in weakening the enemy's strength, and his Persia expeditionary force not only played the role of completing the encirclement, but also his most trusted offensive force. Now, due to an accident, the expeditionary force's strength was scattered. After the Devers learned of this emergency situation through the cavalry scouts, although anxious, this was still one of the possibilities in his plan, and he had a backup plan. He immediately sent out cavalry and urged Mercies to speed up and rush to the place where Felicius' troops were fighting to rendezvous with Felicius, concentrate their forces, annihilate the unexpected enemy in one fell swoop, and then re-enter the encirclement and annihilation of the Lucarians. Time was now the key to Shi-Jun's victory. Akapairu also knew its importance. The two elite troops were bathed in blood. One side was the warriors selected from the entire Lucanian tribal alliance. They had not gone through intense fighting and were still full of strength. The other side was the Greek mercenaries who had gone on an expedition to Persia. They were experienced and skilled, but the non-stop running made them extremely weak. But the process of the battle surprised Akapairu. He originally thought that the Greeks did not form a phalanx, and in such a melee, the Lucanian warriors, who were used to this fighting style, should have the upper hand, but the Lucanian warriors gradually began to retreat. Standing high in the rear, Akapairu observed, the Greeks often gathered in groups of dozens. In fact, it was a unique unit of the Devers mercenaries. Not only were they very organized, flexible, and had a tacit understanding with each other, which made them more lethal. The Lucanians, on the other hand, were cut into pieces by them, like a plate of loose sand. This made him realize the seriousness of the matter. He quickly sent a small team of warriors and ordered them to return to the camp quickly, and inform the great leader of Picassus, Sinsing. Immediately bring the remaining warriors to help him defeat the current enemy, and further crush the enemy's plot. The warriors who went back to report were attacked by the Led's cavalry. Last night, the Devers took the opportunity to temporarily borrow 10 war horses from Buckos, so that the mercenaries' cavalry team could be rebuilt. Due to the rugged mountain road, the cavalry's speed could not be fully exerted. A few wounded warriors escaped the cavalry's pursuit and ran all the way to the Lucanian camp. Hurry up and inform the great leader of Sinsing. We have been ambushed, send reinforcements quickly. Under the surprised gaze of the warriors who were preparing to withdraw from the camp, the exhausted warriors who fell to the ground shouted anxiously. However, the expressions of the surrounding warriors began to become a little strange. Oh no, it's the Whigs! The warrior who reported the news realized that these people were different and could not help but be shocked. But he saw a person squatting down and asked in a deep voice, "What ambush? What happened? The warriors seemed to remember that the person who spoke was a leader of Whig City called Saru. Akapiru let Picassus and Whig be in charge of the withdrawal of the camp, but Sinsing handed all the hard work to the Whigs. He, his son, and several leaders were in the big tent discussing how to protect the interests of Picassus after occupying the Zubari plain. The guard suddenly rushed in and shouted in panic, "Great leader, it's not good! The Whigs have suddenly attacked us." "What?" Sinsing was shocked and immediately cursed angrily. "Those damn Whigs, do they not want to live any more?" He hurried out of the military tent, and the scene in front of him was far beyond his expectations. Thick smoke was billowing everywhere in the camp, countless tents were burning in the fire, the Whigs were holding spears and divided into countless teams, chasing and killing the unguarded Picassus warriors everywhere. The Picassus people were fleeing in panic. Sinsing's ears were filled with the shrill screams of his people, which almost drove him mad. "Ah! I've said it before, these despicable Briti people should be killed." But Akapiru just did not listen. "Ninath, hurry up! Quickly organize the warriors to counterattack. Counterattack! Repel them! Kill them all! And destroy Whig City!" Ah! Needless to say, Glynard and several leaders had already rushed out anxiously. Chapter 96. For a moment the camp was in chaos. Ninath and the rest could not gather enough soldiers to repel the Zeg's rebellion for revenge. "Captain, look!" Outside the Lucania camp, the mercenary cavalry who was observing the situation shouted excitedly. Leds was frustrated that he didn't manage to stop all the Lucanian soldiers who came to report, but he didn't expect the enemy's camp to be on fire. Then, he saw the people inside killing each other. He couldn't believe his eyes. "Captain, it's internal strife. The enemy is having an internal strife." The cavalry beside him continued to shout excitedly. Led suppressed the excitement in his heart and observed for a while. After confirming that there was no doubt, he said, "Quick! Go back and tell Leader Devers that the enemy camp is in serious internal strife and is temporarily unable to send reinforcements." The Devers did not know that there was an internal strife in the Lucania camp. He was now worried about the stalemate in front of him. Even though the Lucania soldiers were not fully equipped, lacked physical strength, and were slippery, due to frequent trampling, the river became muddy, they were still like the tide in the sea, crashing wave after wave against the Greek defense line. Their bravery was also stimulated by the screams of their compatriot. Even if they were stabbed by a bayonet, they would not let go. When they were knocked down by a round shield, they would desperately hook onto the feet of the Greek soldiers before they slid down the slope. The Greek defense line in the north was crumbling. "Report, Leader Dracos has fallen." "What?" The Devers was shocked. At the back of the heavy infantry line, he could already feel the commotion of the mercenaries in front, and this commotion was spreading. "Let Akita send 300 people to support the north." The Devers said anxiously. "Leader, you have given this order before. Tarantum has no soldiers to send at all. They are also in a difficult situation," Assists reminded. "Is that so?" The Devers rubbed his face with his hands. This was the first time he independently commanded such a large battle. It was related to the future of him and the soldiers, so he was a little nervous. He took a deep breath and tried to calm himself down. Then, he decisively ordered, "Order the slave team and the light shield soldiers to enter the battle." Then, he looked back at Marcius. "It's our turn." Marcius excitedly slapped the round shield with his saber. The guards also put down their spears, drew their sabers, and roared loudly. With their rich experience, they knew that in such a crowded battlefield, long weapons were no longer effective. Devers took the lead and rushed forward. Marcius's guards followed closely behind and quickly protected his left and right side. Assists raised the military flag and followed behind the Devers. The fluttering flag caused the mercenaries who were beginning to scatter to hesitate in their footsteps. It also gave the Lucanians who were charging randomly a target, and they gradually surged towards the Devers. The pressure on the other lines of defense was slightly relieved, but the impact on the Devers suddenly increased. At this moment, the bronze horn continued to sound. Although the soldiers with light shields were numb from throwing javelins so frequently, they did not hesitate to raise their shields and long-handled reverse-blade blades under Epthenis and Xpit's lead and rushed forward to block the gap in the mercenaries' defense line. And the slave soldiers could not wait any longer, because the Devers had promised them that as long as they won the battle, they would be free. So when the order came, they shouted, "For freedom!" With their abundant physical strength and high fighting spirit, they, who had no combat skills, forcibly drove some of the enemies who had broken through the defense line down the slope. At the same time, some mercenaries were also pushed down by them. The group led by Mirzas was also shouting, "For freedom!" Under the lead of the veteran mercenaries, not only did the 1,000 slaves quickly reach where Felicius was, they also went around the front of the entangled and chaotic battle between the two groups, striking the enemy's flank and rear with all their might like a hammer. Akapiru and the other two leaders, who were worrying about the battle in the rear, were the first to bear the brunt. The few guards around them could not stop the fierce attack of the excited slaves. "Why? Why hasn't Sinsing arrived yet?" Akapiru shouted angrily. "Leader, let's retreat, we won't be able to leave if we delay any longer." His subordinate anxiously advised. "Retreat? Leaving nearly 10,000 warriors here? How could Akapiru be willing to do that?" He still wanted to persist, but he heard a sorrowful cry not far away, "Leader! Leader!" It turned out that the leader of Nudum, Eudora, had been hit by several spears and had fallen to the ground. Akapiru finally stopped hesitating. Under the desperate protection of his subordinates, Akapiru and the leader of Laos, Tura, fled west in panic with dozens of people. The remaining 500 Lucanian warriors were surrounded like dumplings. At this time, Led's cavalry had just rushed back to the battle site and shouted, "There is internal strife in the enemy camp. Reinforcements will not come for the time being." The good news boosted the morale of the mercenaries, and the Lucanian soldiers who could understand Greek were shocked. The Lucanians were the neighbors of the Greek city-states. Although they were enemies, they also traded with each other, so there were many people who could understand Greek. Coupled with the fact that their leader had deserted, the morale of the Lucanians plummeted. The mercenaries and slave soldiers attacked from the front and back, and the 500 Lucanian warriors were either killed or fled. The combined troops did not rest. Felicius ordered the slave soldiers and mercenaries led by mercers to reinforce the western defensive line at top speed. At this time, the situation of the western line of defense was worse than the northern line of defense. The troops led by Capys were limited, and the thin line of defense was broken through in many places by the surging flow of people. Capys, Antonius, and Alexis, along with the other soldiers, armed with shields and spears, went into battle. According to the military law established by divers, unless there were special circumstances, company captains were not allowed to personally engage the enemy in battle. This was to prevent losing control of command. At this critical moment, Felicius arrived with his team, and the addition of nearly 2,000 people finally stabilized the line of defense. The battle lasted for more than an hour, and the impact of the Lucanian tribal coalition on the line of defense began to weaken. The entire riverbank was filled with warriors who had been injured by spears, javelins, arrows, flying stones, and even their own tribesmen. Moans, wails, and cries were endless, and the sounds were getting louder and louder, but the number of tribal warriors still fighting was decreasing. More and more warriors saw that there was no hope of breaking through, and turned to cross the Tino River to escape to the hot spring swamp. In the end, they were either washed away by the river, or their feet were stuck in the mud of the swamp. Unable to move at this time, the Devers saw that the time was ripe, and resolutely gave the order to attack. The brass horn sounded loudly and urgently. Under the stimulation of the impending victory, the already exhausted Greek soldiers, under the leadership of the Devers, Archita, Felicius, and other generals, launched their final attack on the enemies who had almost lost the ability to resist downslope. The Lucanian warriors could not resist and retreated repeatedly. In the end, other than a small number of warriors who surrendered, the rest were either killed or forced into the Tino River and the hot spring swamp, dying under the long-range attacks of arrows and javelins. The Devers independently commanded the first large-scale battle in their long military career, the Battle of the Great River Beach, later known as the Battle of the Hot Spring Swamp. With about 7,500 mixed troops, including slaves, against more than 9,000 people of the Lucanian tribal coalition, the final result was that the Greek army suffered more than 1,000 casualties, half of them were slaves, and the Lucanian tribal coalition of more than 9,000 people, except for more than 400 who surrendered. The Devers obtained a complete victory. The corpses of the entire Great River Beach were piled up like a mountain, and blood flowed like a river. The efforts of Sinsing, Ninath, and the others were ultimately in vain. Picassus's defeat was irreversible. In the end, they took more than 200 people and fled from the camp in a sorry state. They watched helplessly as the fire burned the camp that stretched for several miles into ashes. Chapter 97. Great Leader, when Akbalu comes back and sees this, he will probably go crazy. Saru stood at the entrance of the mountain and looked at the camp that was still burning. He was indescribably happy. So what? Even if Akbalu goes crazy, he can still command the army and break through Vega City? Sidorum said worriedly. He was angry that Saru had taken the initiative to attack Picassus and forced him to take action. Vega City is not that easy to attack. As long as we build a defense on the mountain path, they will attack from above. It's hard to say if they can reach Vega City. Saru also complained. We shouldn't have given in to their threats and joined this damn alliance. Saru, it's easy for you to say. The Laos are very familiar with our terrain, and we don't have any backup. We don't have enough food and we can't afford to fight this war. Sidorum expressed his helplessness. Great Leader, don't worry. I don't think the Lucanian tribal alliance will be able to come back. Saru comforted Sidorum confidently. Didn't you hear what Akbalu said before? The Lucanians were ambushed and even had to come back to call for backup. It's obvious that the situation is very bad. I hope that's the case. Sidorum sighed and said solemnly, what we need to do now is to immediately return to Vega City and gather the tribesmen to strengthen the defense. At the same time, send people to Cosenza and ask for help. Ask for help from Cosenza? Saru was very surprised. These days I've thought about it. If the British still fight with each other like before, the Lucanians and Greeks will always bully us. Sidorum said in a low voice. Yes, we should join forces with Cosenza, just like the Lucanian tribal alliance. Saru was still young and did not have a deep hatred for the other tribes of Briti. Sidorum did not speak. He was thinking about something. At this time, Saru said excitedly, Great Leader, since we have become enemies with the Lucanians, when we pass by Laos, shouldn't we take the opportunity to rob them? I think you've lost your mind. If you don't cherish the lives of your people, do you still deserve to be a leader? Was Laos Avenogis so easy to provoke? It's already a problem for us to cross the lower reaches of the Lao River without arousing their suspicion, and you're actually thinking of robbing them. Sidorum scolded and finally made the excited young leader lower his head. After walking for a while, he couldn't help but say, I didn't expect that the defeated Turii would still be able to ambush the allied forces of the Lucanian tribes. Could it be that they received reinforcements from Tarentum or Clotho? Sidorum did not reply. Instead, he turned around and looked at the billowing smoke in the sky. He could not help but think excitedly, if the Lucanian alliance really suffered heavy losses in the ambush of the Greeks, then the situation in this area will change greatly. What should the Whigs do? Sinsing led his remaining clansmen and retreated eastward. In his grief and indignation, he only had one thought in his mind: find Akbalu and lead his army to exterminate Vig City and avenge his dead clansmen. On the way, they met Akbalu's defeated troop. Akbalu hoped to return to the camp quickly and get reinforcements to salvage the situation. When he heard the bad news from Sinsing that the Whigs rebelled, Picasus suffered heavy casualties, and the camp was burned to ashes by fire. He was so anxious that he fainted on the spot. Sinsing also heard that more than 9,000 soldiers were ambushed by the Greeks, and it was still unknown whether they were dead or alive. He was stunned on the spot. The generals in the Turai city hall received a report from the sentries on the city wall in the morning. A large army was suspected to be on the move outside the city. When the morning fog dispersed, the scouts went out to investigate and soon came back with a report. There was nothing unusual around Turai city, but the mercenary camp was almost empty. The generals were shocked. Last night, Burkos came back and said that the mercenaries were willing to stay. For this reason, Turai city was busy for the night, preparing the materials for these greedy mercenaries. Who would have thought that these untrustworthy mercenaries would escape in the middle of the night? The generals scolded the mercenaries, and some even suggested that warships should be sent to the sea to search for traces of them and give them a heavy blow to urge them to return. At this time, the scouts that went to the west returned. What? The mercenaries joined forces with the Tarantamu reinforcements to attack the Lucanian army? Cunagurata couldn't believe his ears. The generals in the city hall were in an uproar. Dionysus cursed. The Devers are crazy, trying to destroy Turai's hope. Yes. After losing the protection of the mercenaries, Turai city will face the attack of the Lucanians alone. What should we do? Polixus said worriedly. Cunagurata said decisively, send out Burkos immediately, and persuade the mercenaries to return at all costs. Turai will not allow them to mess around. However, Burkos returned without success. Daves, who had always been kind to him, firmly refused his request. He even sent people to chase away Burkos, who was still begging bitterly, and let him return to the city to wait for the news of victory. I think the Devers are very confident in defeating the Lucanians. Should we believe in them? Burkos comforted the generals, but in fact, he himself was very doubtful. His words immediately caused the generals to scold him. Cunagurata criticized him for not being a good judge of character. Because of their friendship, Polixus didn't directly criticize him, but complained that the mercenaries were untrained wolves and didn't keep their promises. Dionysus angrily accused him of wasting the national treasury's money and resources, and found a group of mercenaries, but they didn't do anything. He threatened to propose a trial in the council. The Turai generals spent the whole morning complaining, cursing, and feeling uneasy, but they didn't have the courage to send out the only 2,000 soldiers in Turai to help in the battle. In the afternoon, the sentries on the Turai walls heard the rumbling of footsteps again. The scouts sent out saw the mercenaries returning. Although they looked like they were in tatters, covered in blood, and were supporting their injured comrades, they didn't look defeated. Instead, they were full of energy, talking and laughing loudly all the way. In the team, there were more than a dozen carts full of armor and weapons, and many slaves were holding several sets of armor, shields, spears, and helmet. They also held their heads high and looked proud. At the back of the team, there were hundreds of naked men under the escort of the soldiers, walking obediently towards the mercenaries' camp. With one look at their messy long hair, it was obvious that they weren't Greeks. The scouts' hearts beat wildly. They guessed a possibility, an almost impossible possibility. At this moment, one of the mercenaries galloped towards them. He raised his hands to show that he didn't have a weapon, so as not to scare these Turai away. The Turai scouts didn't move. The mercenaries came in front of them, reined in the reins, raised their heads, and said proudly, "Our leader of the Devers wants you to tell the Turai generals that our mercenaries and the reinforcements from Tarantum have wiped out the main force of the Lucanian army at the Big River. They have been driven out of Turai territory by us. You You really defeated the Lucanians? The scout asked in disbelief, his voice trembling. Of course it's true. Why would we lie? The mercenaries proudly pointed at the captives in the team and said, Also, our leader wants me to remind you Turii that the big river is full of corpses. We hope you can quickly get rid of them. Otherwise, it's easy to cause a plague. Before the scouts reached the city, they waved their hands and shouted excitedly, Victory! We won! The Lucanians were wiped out. In the city hall, the generals were exhausted from the long period of uneasiness. Chapter 98. What's going on? Dionysus asked in confusion. With a loud bang, the door was pushed open. A guard rushed in with a face full of joy. Generals, the scouts are back. They said the mercenaries won. The Lucanian army has been destroyed. Is this true? The generals could not believe their ears and asked in unison. The scouts are right outside the door. They even went to the place where the mercenaries fought the Lucanians. They said the place was full of Lucanian corpses. Unbelievable! Unbelievable! They really won. Dionysus murmured as if he was in a dream. How did they do it? Cunigarata had been to the battlefield yesterday, and the ferocity of the Lucanian soldiers still made him fearful. Moreover, he knew the difference in strength between the two sides, so the news of victory was like a miracle to him. What kind of people are the Devers? At this moment, Ansitanos was very interested to know more about this mysterious leader of the mercenaries. Polixus immediately remembered the smiling young man he saw on Bucco's ship. He didn't expect that this seemingly harmless young man would actually destroy the Lucaria Alliance army, which was regarded as a scourge in Tulii, and save the city of Tulii, which was in a precarious situation. He was a young man, but the mercenaries said that he was the blessed one of Hades. They also called him the creator of miracles. On the way back from Persia, Buccos, who had been criticized by the generals and had been staying in the city hall all this time, proudly recounted the heroic deeds he had heard about divers. There was only one voice in his heart that was raging and boiling. He did it! He really did it! The generals did not laugh at these seemingly ridiculous rumors, nor did they face Borco's jealous and excited gaze. They all strode out of the city hall. In the square of the city hall, countless women, children, and old people wearing black veils were in mourning. Their faces were full of sorrow, but at this moment, they were cheering loudly for victory. Some people even cried, but those were tears of joy. The haze that shrouded the hearts of the tourists was now gone. The scouts also brought a message from the Devers. They hoped that the tourists would send men to clean up the battlefield and bury the corpses to prevent the plague. Out of caution, the generals decided to send someone to the battlefield to check it out. This time, Dionysus personally led the team. When they arrived at the river bank, the scene in front of them made them gasp. The river bank, including the hot spring swamp, had turned into a red river of blood. The blood was filled with naked corpses. The mercenaries had taken away the armors and weapons of the dead. It was like hell on earth. This is a horrifying miracle. Dionysus was trembling all over. What a horrifying favorite of Hades! In order to thank the Devers, Archita, as well as the leaders and generals such as Dracos, Adrianx, and Cesta for their contributions to the Turin, the generals and the council decided to send Bulcos to accompany Ansitanos to the mercenary camp and invite them to the city of Turin to participate in the victory celebration to receive the gratitude of the Turin people. At the same time, they also brought 100 jars of wine and 50 jars of olive oil to reward the soldiers. The group rushed to the camp excitedly, but they were stopped by the guard at the gate. The guard said that the leader and the soldiers were extremely tired after a day of fierce battle. Now most of them had fallen asleep to recover their energy, so the guards were informed not to let anyone enter to prevent accidents. Bulcos tried to persuade them again and again, but the guard insisted. Bulcos had been to the Devers camp several times before, so he knew that the military rules here were very strict. In addition, the camp was indeed unusually quiet, so the tourists had no choice but to leave. Then, they found Archita. Archita received them happily, but when they explained the purpose of their visit, Archita looked troubled and said, "To tell you the truth, this victory is entirely due to the genius planning of the Devers. The reinforcements from Tarantum only assisted from the side. If the Devers don't go, of course, I can't go myself, lest I be ridiculed." Ansitanos had no choice but to invite them tomorrow. The mercenary soldiers were indeed ordered to rest, but the mercenary officers, as well as Adrianx and Cesta, were now gathered in the Devers' big tent. After receiving the report from the guard, the Devers smiled and said, "The tourists were wary of us like thieves before, and now they want to please us. Isn't it a little too late?" "Yeah, I hate the tourist faces. We didn't annihilate the Lucanians for them," Amyntas said contemptuously. "It's just a pity to miss the tourist celebration. Maybe there are many beautiful tourists who are looking forward to the leader's visit." Oliver's words made everyone laugh. The Devers looked at him amusedly. "Why don't I give this opportunity to you?" "I can't." Oliver shook his head vigorously. "The tourists invited the famous Devers of the Lucanians, not a nobody like me. I'd better continue sleeping in the camp." Oliver's pretentious comical appearance caused everyone to burst into laughter again. "Leader, we still need to maintain a good relationship with the tourists. After all, they will be our neighbors in the future," Felicius reminded. The Devers nodded. His eyes fell on Adrianx and Cesta, and he asked with concern, "How is Drax?" "He's much better under herpes treatment. He even told us to listen to your command," Cesta said gratefully. Adrianx also nodded. The Devers, of course, could tell that Cesta was using Dracos to express his obedience to the Devers. He immediately said, "That's great. We don't want to lose a warrior like Dracos." If it wasn't for him standing at the front of the defense line, blocking the enemy's attack and boosting the morale of the soldiers, the northern defense line would have been broken. After praising Dracos, he looked around and said in a deep voice, "I'll reiterate tonight's battle plan." Everyone immediately stopped joking and focused on the Devers. The Devers picked up a wooden stick and pointed at the wooden table. On the wooden table was a model of a city made of mud. "Tonight at 2 o'clock, the entire army will break camp and head to Amendola. After crossing the Cislino River, Helos—" "Yes. Don't let us build that stone wall for nothing. I hope your 10 days of training will be effective." "Leader, don't worry," Helos said confidently. "The soldiers will use hooks and ropes to climb up the wall and open the gate in the shortest time possible." The Devers nodded and then said, "If we are discovered by the enemy, our sneak attack will be blocked. Capus, Antonio, your 2 companies will carry ladders. Alexis, your company will carry truncheons. Rush to the bottom of the city as fast as possible and attack." "Yes." The 3 of them answered without hesitation. "After the gate is opened, Amyntas, your company will be the vanguard. Break through the enemy's defense line as fast as possible and kill your way into the city. Finally, it's my turn." Amyntas grinned. "After entering the city, all troops will follow my previous plan. Under the guidance of the Amendolan guides, follow these 2 mountain roads and attack the top of the mountain quickly." The Devers pointed at a spot on the model of the city with a stick. "According to the Amendolans, there aren't many large and flat places in this mountain city. There are only the Senate, the square, and the temple at the top of the mountain. So, these 3 places are most likely where the Lucanians imprisoned the Amendolan people and their own barrack. You must occupy these places as fast as possible. Is everyone clear?" "Yes," everyone shouted in unison. At this moment Alexis asked, "When can we light the torches?" "Good question." The Devers realized that he had missed an important detail. After some thought, he said, "When the gate is open, or when the sneak attack fails, we can light the torches when we attack by force." Everyone, The Devers emphasized, tomorrow, the Turii may ask for our help to take back Amendolan, or the Lucanians may escape from Amendolan. So, we can only do it tonight. Only when we take back Amendolan from the Lucanians will it become our trophy. Only then can we save ourselves a lot of trouble and become the true masters of Amendolan. So, we can only succeed tonight. Chapter 99. Vespa did not expect things to turn out this way. Yesterday afternoon, when his messenger arrived at the Zubari Plains, the Lucanian alliance had already retreated. Fearing an attack by the Greek army, they had no choice but to retreat to the city. Today, Vespa was waiting anxiously for the Lucanian alliance to arrive at the Zubari Plains, but they did not come. Unexpectedly, in the afternoon, the spy hurriedly reported that the Greek mercenaries had completely wiped out the Lucanian alliance at the big bank of the Tino River. Vespa was stupefied and terrified. He wanted nothing more than to run away from this terrifying mercenary army, as far away as possible. The powerful tribes of Lucania had suffered heavy losses, and their control over the surrounding tribes would inevitably weaken. Vespa's tribe should not be oppressed for the time being after returning to the Lucanian mountains. However, he could not bear to leave the city empty-handed. His people were so poor that they were afraid of losing the mountains of supplies. At this time, the spy's other words calmed him down. The Greeks had also suffered heavy losses, at least 1,000 casualties. Yes, after such a big battle, did the Greeks not need to rest and reorganize? Vespa scolded himself for being foolish. He ordered his people to start packing their luggage and loading supplies. Depending on the situation, they would be transported in batches. After a busy afternoon, the clansmen were so tired that they fell into a deep sleep at night. This delay was one of the little regrets of Vespa's life. But decades later, when his people and descendants talked about this day, they would all be glad that they did not leave immediately. Late at night, a full moon hung in the sky, bringing a glimmer of light to the dark night. The moonlight was like water, quietly shining on the Zubari Plains. A long line of people silently advanced north of the coast, crossing the Zubari River, the abandoned vineyards, and the Saraceno River. Not only did they not slow down, they even picked up speed. Only when they crossed the Cisnu River did the entire army suddenly stop. Every warrior looked at the silhouetted city of Amandarara in the distance, feeling very excited. The Devers took a deep breath to calm themselves down, then waved at Helos. The attack had begun. That night, Vespa had a good dream. He dreamed that he had not left Amendalar, but had lived there for many years. Every day, he would patrol his herds of cattle and sheep, wander among the olive trees full of fruit, and drink sweet wine. Great leader, this is bad. The Greeks have entered the city. The guard rushed in panic. What did you say? Vespa was startled. Early the next morning, Akita, who had just woken up from his sleep, received a strange news from the guards. The mercenaries who lived next to them had disappeared. He immediately went to check, and sure enough, there was no one there. Immediately Aketa felt that something was wrong. Then he went to the Devers camp. There were people in the camp, but they were all the Devers supply camp, medical camp, wounded soldiers, women and a large number of slaves, mainly from Turii. They were all loading their luggage and preparing to leave. Orchita strode forward and grabbed Mercies, who was shouting and commanding the slaves. Mercies, where did the Devers and his soldiers go? Mercies stammered and did not respond, which made him even more suspicious. At this moment, a familiar voice came from behind. Akita, I'm really sorry. I came late and made you worry. Akita turned around and saw the Devers smiling. They looked a little tired but seemed to be in a good mood. Where did your soldiers go? I have good news for you. The Devers dismounted and handed the reins to assist. Then, he said calmly, we took back Amendalar. When? Akita was shocked. Last night. They took down a mountain city in one night? Looking at the Devers' expression, they did not seem to be faking it. Attacking a city was a big problem for any city-state army. Yesterday's battle had already amazed Akita with the Devur's grand spirit, creative battle plans, extremely strong commanding ability, and the ability to combine different troops. The fact that they took down a mountain city in one night made Akita, who had many battle experiences, completely convinced. He smiled bitterly and said, "Devurs, you have completed another difficult mission. I'm really jealous." Akita's straightforwardness made the Devurs laugh. "In fact, we also relied on the blessing of the goddess of fate. The Lucanians' defense was lax and completely defenseless." "Oh, I see." Akita was curious and wanted to listen to what he had to say. Unexpectedly, the Devurs changed the topic and said solemnly, "There's something I want to get the support of you and Tarantum." "What is it?" Akita looked at the serious expression of the Devurs and was stunned. The Devurs stared at him and said word by word, "We mercenaries want to become citizens of Amendalar." Akita was stunned again. He asked with uncertainty, "All mercenaries? Are you serious?" "This is the wish of all mercenaries," the Devurs said loudly in an unquestionable tone. Akita's expression became serious. He looked around. Whether it was Mirza's assistants or the busy guards, they all stopped what they were doing and looked at him with expectant eyes. Akita hurriedly turned his head and looked at the Devurs. He said in a deep voice, "It seems that taking down Amendalar was not a spur-of-the-moment move." Daphis did not answer directly. Instead, he said emotionally, "Akita, you were born into a noble family in Tarantum and live a good life. You can't understand the situation of us mercenaries who wander around and have no control over our life and death. Having a home is our greatest desire." Akita was silent for a moment before asking, "Does Archon Marchers of Amendalar agree?" The day the Lucanians occupied Amendalar, he was seriously injured and died a few days later. The other Archon, Glat Baffler. Last night, when we attacked Amendalar, the people of Amendalar, who were imprisoned in the Temple of Zeus at the top of the mountain led by Glat Baffler, attacked the Lucanian guards before we even reached the top of the mountain. As a result, a fierce battle broke out between the two sides. When we arrived, Glat Baffler was already dead, along with some members of the Senate, the Devurs said in a heavy tone. Akita looked at the Devurs, and the Devurs continued calmly, "According to our statistics, there are about 1,000 people who survived in Amendalar, and they are not in good health. Nearly half of them are old and many of them are injured. Even if we leave, I'm afraid they won't be able to maintain the normal management and labor of Amendalar, let alone protect this mountain city." Akita understood. The Devurs not only wanted the mercenaries to become citizens of Amendalar, but they also wanted to become the masters there. He was surprised by the Devurs' ambition and said, "You should ask for Turiai's opinion first. After all, Amendalar is their ally." "Akita, to be honest, Turiai has suffered 2 crushing defeats and has lost a lot of strength. I'm afraid they don't have the ability to take care of Amendalar. Although the weak Amendalar is not rich, its position is still very important. I'm afraid it will also attract the attention of other forces. At least in our hands, we can defend it and are willing to become allies with Tarantum to maintain the security of this area and ensure that Heraclea will no longer be threatened by the indigenous people." The Devurs solemnly promised. Akita was a little moved when he heard that. After all, Turiai's performance in the war with Lucania was too poor and almost caused a disaster in this area. Therefore, he cautiously said, "I don't have the right to decide whether you can have Amendalar or not. This needs to be approved by the Senate of Tarantum. I will immediately send someone to rush back to Tarantum by boat. I hope you will also send someone to go with you and express your wishes to the Senate of Tarantum." "Thank you very much, Akita," the Devurs said excitedly. "My only regret is that you can no longer be a citizen of Tarantum," Akita said sincerely. The Devurs was greatly moved and quickly said, "But we will be allies. Maybe one day we will fight side by side again." Chapter 100. Although the Devurs, Archita, and the others did not participate, the tourist victory celebration was still held. The whole city temporarily suppressed their sadness and celebrated the hard-won victory. The banquet held by the generals lasted until late at night. Ansetanos, who had drunk countless bottles of wine, slept until the sun was high up in the sky. When he left the city, it was almost noon. When he arrived at the empty Devers camp, he was dumbfounded. Fortunately, they saw the reinforcements from Tarentum who were still stationed at the mercenary camp. Only then did they know that the mercenaries had gone to Armendalara. The mercenaries had taken over the city of Armendalara. The shocking news shocked Ansetanos and Buckos again. They immediately sped up and headed north, eager to see the Devers. Halfway there, Ansetanos suddenly stopped the team. "Let's go back immediately." "Why is that, General?" Buckos asked, puzzled. Ansetanos, who had calmed down, sighed. "The mercenaries were so anxious to take over Armendalara last night. Today, they even moved their slaves and supplies into Armendalara." "What does this mean?" "Ah!" Buckos exclaimed in surprise. "Don't tell me they want to occupy Armendalara?" Ansetanos nodded and said with some melancholy, "More importantly, Archita has also gone to Armendalara." "What does this mean?" Buckos immediately came to a realization after Ansetanos' reminder. He shouted in surprise again, "Does Tarentum support the mercenaries to occupy Armendalara? Maybe it's just Archita's personal wish." Ansetanos was comforting Buckos and himself. He smiled bitterly. "If Tarentum really supports the mercenaries, can we, the tourists, refuse? Tarentum and the mercenaries are heroes who saved the tourists." Ansetanos sighed again with a worried expression. "Sigh. But from now on, Tarentum's influence will cross Heraclea and approach the Sabari plain." Then what do we do now?" Berks asked anxiously. "Of course we'll go back and discuss our strategy before we come back," Ansetanos said. Judging from his helpless expression, it was obvious that he did not think the tourists had any good ideas for the mercenaries to occupy Amandara. On the way back to the city, he kept muttering to himself, "Sigh. It's only been half a year and Turin has fallen to such a state. Teacher is right, war is the fastest way to change the rise and fall of a city. What Turin lacks now is military talents like Devers and Akita." Upon hearing this, Berks recalled that he hadn't had the time to invite the Devers to join the Turii. Now it seemed that even if he said it, the Devers wouldn't agree. He also recalled the scene of his trusted slave, Medas, leading the Devers to explore Amandara. Perhaps at that time, the Devers had already set their sights on this mountain city. Before the situation was clear, he actually began to plan for Amandara and finally succeeded. Was this luck? No. The victories of these two battles were won by the mercenaries he led. It was achieved by his own hard work step by step. Although the mercenaries' act of occupying Amandara infringed on the interests of the tourists, Berks couldn't tell if he was more resentful or in awe. The Devers were accompanying Akita to visit Amandara. Akita listened to the Devers' narration of the capture of the mountain city last night, while checking out the mercenaries' attack route and trying to use the rope hook with great interest. After entering the city gate, Akita saw most of the bloodstains along the way and the mercenaries patrolling every few steps. Their faces were filled with the same excitement and pride as the Devers. He hesitated again and decided to make a suggestion to the Devers. "Devers, I think if you mercenaries want to successfully enter Amandara, it's best to get the consent of the citizens of Amandara." Okay. The Devers responded. Akita saw that he was being perfunctory. He thought about it and was ready to persuade him. If a city wants to have good order, not only must it have strict laws, but it must also be obeyed. After a long time, the law will become a good tradition of the city and become the natural cornerstone of the city's order, bringing stability to the people and development to the city. If it was destroyed from the beginning, Axeta stopped and pointed at the strange pine tree that grew obliquely on the hillside and said meaningfully, "Just like this tree, it grew askew from the beginning. Later on, even if it tried its best to grow, it wouldn't be able to become a towering tree." Of course, the Devers understood the metaphor in Akita's words, causing him to fall into deep thought. China's historical tradition emphasized result. No matter what means were used, everything that had been done before would be forgiven and ultimately recognized. That was why there were such deep-rooted sayings as, "The winner is king and the loser is bandit," and "The situation is urgent." However, the Devers who graduated from the University of Political Science and Law in his previous life knew that in the Republic of Rome, which was known as the Son of Law, the hundreds of years of inheritance had caused its laws and traditions to restrain the excesses of those in power. Even if there was a series of upheavals, it would not cause the country to be greatly shaken. For example, when Caesar crossed the Rubicon River, he did not allow his army to enter the city of Rome because it was a tradition. Antony, who doted on Cleopatra, did not agree to her request to incorporate the Jewish kingdom into Egypt because it was the duty of every citizen of Rome not to harm the interests of Rome. It was a tradition. Octavian, who held great power, did not turn the Republic of Rome into an empire because it was a deep-rooted tradition that the Senate and the citizens' assembly were the centers of power in Rome. He could only slowly change the institutions of power in Rome bit by bit over the decades. However, when the commander of the imperial guards assassinated the extreme Emperor Caligula of Rome, whom he had been protecting since he was a child, it was a bad tradition that the imperial guards frequently assassinated the Emperor of Rome. It would have been fine if the Devers was just a leader who only cared about immediate benefits and seeking temporary pleasure, but his ambitions were not limited to the small Amendola. Archita's advice was like a blow to his head. The actions of the mercenaries not only had to consider the feelings of the people of Amendola and be beneficial to their future rule, they also had to consider the feelings of the mercenaries as outsiders who had taken root in Great Greece and the feelings of the surrounding city-states towards them. Forceful actions were obviously unwelcome and could easily lead to isolation. The Devers decided to change his previous method of seeking quick success and instant benefit. At the same time, this reflection also changed his behavior and began to think from the perspective of a true Greek. Archita, thank you for the reminder. Out of gratitude to Archita, the Devers decided to immediately put one of his ideas into action. I heard that the Pythagorean school of thought is not in a good situation in Great Greece. Hearing this, Archita's face darkened slightly as he said with a complicated expression, "Yes. The people of many city-states in Great Greece do not agree with the philosophy of our school and use various means to suppress the members of the school, causing most of the disciples to have no choice but to leave Great Greece and settle down in Greece's mainland, Phelios. Now, only Tarentum remains tolerant of the school. I agree with your school's philosophy of all things are numbers. I think that if we use numbers to manage the city-states, it will definitely be more detailed and efficient. Also, your school encourages self-control, abstinence, purity, and obedience, which I also agree with very much. At the same time, you also dare to break the customs and allow women to participate in the study. That's a pioneering move," the Devers said sincerely. "If the mercenaries become the masters of Amendola, I will definitely invite the members of the Pythagorean school to come here to train students and establish an academy, with the city-states providing funding." The reason why Archita was so frank about the current situation of the Pythagorean school was because everyone in Great Greece knew about the Pythagorean school. Moreover, the Devers had also expressed his good impression of the school before, but he did not expect the Devers to have such a good impression of the school. For a moment, he could not believe it. "Is what you said true? Do you want me to swear to the gods?" Chapter 101. When Cornelius was led into the Senate by the soldiers, he was both excited and nervous. Ever since Amendola was occupied by the Lucanians, Cornelis's life had been like hell for the past 6 months. During the day, he was held captive by the Lucarians, herding cattle and sheep, chopping trees, and carrying supplies. If he slacked off, he would be scolded, beaten, and even denied food. At night, he would be locked up in the temple of Zeus with the others. Although the temple was large, thousands of people were crammed together, eating, drinking, and urinating in it. The air was foul and the space was small. Children and adults often cried, and they could not sleep well at night. At the same time, the Lucanians only gave them half a full meal every day, which made their bodies weak. Many of them fell sick and died. During the long period of imprisonment, Cornelis, like the others, had exhausted all his physical and mental resistance. He had resigned himself to his fate, thinking that he would live like this until he quietly returned to the underworld. However, yesterday, they were urgently gathered to prepare the carts and load the supplies. They were busy until night. Even the ferocious Lucarians had to do the work themselves. From their panicked expressions, Cornelis sensed something. Sure enough, the people who could speak Lucanian whispered to them that he had overheard the conversation of the Lucanians. They said things like, "The army of the Grimentum was destroyed by some Greek mercenaries. Those Greeks are all murderous beasts, very scary," and so on. This news made the people of Amyndolara excited. They saw the hope of escape. Late at night, many people tossed and turned in bed, unable to sleep. Then, they heard the faint sound of fighting. What happened? The sensitive people of Amyndolar got up and went to the entrance of the temple, peeking out through the crack of the door. The guards of Lucania panicked, and shouted at each other in panic. The people in the temple could hear clearly, "The Greeks have entered the city." The people were excited. When the usually decisive consul, Great Baffler, saw the guards leaving, seemingly to reinforce the enemy fighting at the foot of the mountain, he immediately organized the people to fight back. The people of Amyndolara, who hated the Lucarians, worked together to break open the gate. They swarmed in and used stones and fists to knock down the few remaining Lucanian guards who had lost their will to fight. As soon as the people left the temple, they ran into the Lucarians who had returned to reinforce them. In fact, the Lucanian warriors could not resist the attack of the mercenaries at all. In a moment of desperation, Wespa thought of the more than 1,000 Greek people imprisoned in the temple. Perhaps they could be used as hostages in exchange for the survival of his tribe. Unarmed and weak, the people of Amyndolara were no match for the Lucarian warriors. However, they had just broken out of the cage, and reinforcements were coming. Filled with anger and hope, the people of Amyndolara were unwilling to surrender again. In the end, Magistrate Gratbaffler was the first to die in battle. The strong citizens who were charging at the front were almost all gone. Just when the Lucarians could no longer control their bloodthirst and were about to kill the remaining trembling citizens of Amyndolara, the Greek mercenaries arrived. In front of the people of Amyndolara, these strong and burly soldiers showed their might. In an instant, they killed the ferocious enemies and forced them to kneel and surrender. When these murderous soldiers walked towards the people of Amyndolara, the people of Amyndolara could not help but tremble. They didn't expect that these soldiers would help them up with concern, prepare clean beds, and serve them steaming hot oatmeal. There was also a doctor who carefully examined their bodies and treated their wound. It was like entering Elysium from hell. Cornelis shed tears of gratitude more than once. Like the others, he began to inquire about the origins of this team that fought valiantly and were full of love for their compatriot. The soldiers, doctors, women who were called nurses by the soldiers, and slaves did not shy away from telling the people everything about themselves. Therefore, Cornelis knew that this Greek troop came from Asia Minor. Under the leadership of Prince Cyrus the Younger of Persia, they went deep into Persia and fought against the army of the king of Persia. Then, they fought for thousands of miles and returned safely to Byzantium. They accepted the employment of the Turii and came to Greece. After the defeat of the Turii, The mercenaries joined forces with the reinforcements from Tarentum and annihilated the allied forces of the Lucanian tribes. Then, without any rest, they attacked Amendolara that night and saved the people. The story of the mercenaries was as legendary and fascinating as the epic Odyssey. What made Cornwallis even more amazed was the leader of the mercenaries, the Devers. According to the soldiers, this young leader was originally just an ordinary soldier with nothing special about him. However, when he fought with the army of the king of Persia, he fell unconscious and woke up. Not only did his personality change drastically, but he also became intelligent and solved many problems. The soldiers all thought that he was favored by Hades, the king of the underworld, and that he became different. Thus, they elected him as their leader. The Devers did not disappoint them and created one miracle after another. He led the soldiers out of the siege and returned to Greece. He also went against everyone's opinion and accepted the invitation of the Turii. When they lost the battle and everyone was pessimistic and lost, he resolutely attacked the powerful Lucanian army and annihilated the enemy with a great disparity in strength, creating an almost impossible miracle. Then, when everyone thought that the mercenaries needed rest after the war, he launched another attack on Amendolara within a day. Therefore, when the mercenary told Cornwallis that the leader of the Devers wanted to see him, he could not wait to see this young leader who led such a unique army and was respected and admired by the soldiers. He was called the Blessed One, the Child of Miracles, and our Devers. As soon as he entered the hall, a young man with a smile on his face greeted him warmly, "Lord Cornwallis." Cornwallis was stunned. "You are." The guard who led the way said proudly, "This is our leader of the Devers." Although he knew from the mercenary that the Devers were young, when he stood in front of him in person, Cornwallis was still surprised by how young and easygoing he was. He was not at all like the experienced mercenary leader that he had imagined. He momentarily lost his composure. The Devers were also sizing up the elder of the Senate of Amendolar. It was said that his family was one of the founders of Amendolar more than 200 years ago. It had continued to this day and had produced countless consuls and elders. It could be said to be a prestigious family in Amendolar. Although Cornwallis was only an elder, he was kind and willing to help others. He had a high reputation among the people, which was why the Devers chose him first. Looking at the middle-aged man who was emaciated because of the long period of imprisonment, the Devers asked with concern, "I heard that you were injured last night. Are you feeling better now?" Cornwallis touched the bandage on his abdomen and said gratefully, "Much better, much better. Your doctor's medical skills are very high. Leader of the Devers, thank you for coming in time last night. Otherwise we would all be dead." The Devers' heart skipped a beat. They looked at Cornwallis carefully. His sincere expression did not seem to be fake. Last night, when he learned that the Lucanians had a fierce battle with the people of Amendolar at the temple, they deliberately slowed down their attack, causing most of the young people of Amendolar to die in battle. He could not help but feel a little guilty and quickly said, "Well, Lord Cornwallis, I invited you here today because I have a message for you. We will be leaving soon." Cornwallis was shocked. "Why?" Chapter 102. It's the Turii again. The selfish Turii. The damned Turii. May the goddess of misfortune curse them. Cornwallis said through gritted teeth. The Devers could guess why a good man who had always been kind to others would hate them so much, Archita had told him. He pretended to be curious and asked, "Master Cornwallis, I remember that the Turii and Amendolara are allies, but you seem to hate the Turii very much. The Turii threatened us to leave Amendolara temporarily to help them defend the city. Otherwise, if the Lucanians besieged Amendolara, they would not provide any help. At that time, considering that the Lucanians were invading from the south, the north was safe. We had no choice but to open the city gates with a large number of supplies, preparing to move to Turii. In the end, we were caught off guard by the Lucanians who risked their lives to float down from the Cini River. In the past 6 months we have suffered a lot. The temple has been defiled, the women have been humiliated, the children have starved to death, and the citizens have been massacred. At this point, Cornelius had tears streaming down his face. All of this is because of the selfish decision of the Turii, but their city is still intact. Every one of us from Amendolara hates the Turii more than the Lucanians. Sigh. The Devers let out a long sigh, not knowing what to say. I heard from your soldiers that it was your decision to take back Amendolara, not the order of the Turii? Cornelius asked while wiping his tears. That's right. That's good. We don't owe the Turii anything anymore. We will pay you double the amount they used to hire you, as long as you stay. Cornelius said resolutely. The Devers said helplessly, Why do you have to do this? We have 3,000 mercenaries, and the money and food we spend every month is not a small amount. Amendola is not a rich city, and we have accepted your employment. When the time comes, we will leave. We don't have a home. We have to go out and take on missions to earn money to make a living. Devers looked a little sad. His words reminded Cornelius, If you don't have a home. He blurted out, Then stay. As soon as he said that, he seemed to be encouraged and said loudly, Yes, all of you stay. Become a citizen of Amendola. Before this, the square in Amendola was used by the Lucaria people as the location of their military camp. It was also the only place where the mercenaries encountered any decent resistance in the city last night. This afternoon, the square had been cleaned up. Only the traces of blood on the marble floor indicated that a battle had taken place here. The survivors of Amendola, except for the young children, gathered in the square, including women and teenagers. At this moment, standing on the wooden platform in the middle of the square were the 5 remaining famous citizens of Amendola, led by Cornelius. Cornelius looked at almost all the citizens of Amendola, old and young, and most of them were women. Most of them had not recovered and even needed the help of mercenaries and doctors. He could not help but feel sad again. A year ago, Amendola had 4,000 citizens. The citizens of a Greek city-state could only be adult males, and the total population was more than 10,000. Now there were only 1,000 people left, mainly women and children. Not to mention protecting the country, they could not even complete the daily labor of planting wheat and herding cattle and sheep. This made him even more determined. Citizens, women, and children of Amendola, I, Cornelius, a member of the Senate, have gathered everyone in the square today because there is an important matter that we need to decide together. More than 200 years ago, our ancestors left Sybaris and came here to build a city. For 200 years, with the nourishment of the Cislino River and the Barano River, and the protection of Mount Amendola, we lived in peace and had abundant resources. Even when our mother Sybaris was destroyed, our land was never affected by the flames of war. But, since last year, our citizens followed the Turris and invaded the Lucanian territory. Cornelius choked with sobs, and many people below the stage burst into tears. My wife did not want to be humiliated by the Lucarians, so she killed herself by hitting her head against a pillar. One of my children also died of an illness. All of you below the stage have had the same tragic experience as me. In 200 years, Amendola has only experienced this one war, and this time, Amendola has almost become a thing of the past, just like our mother Sybaris. When we prayed day and night in the temple for Zeus' salvation, Zeus answered our call and sent our saviors. They are the mercenaries from the Ionian region of Greece, our compatriots. Cornelius pointed to the back of the crowd, where the Devers, some officers and some soldiers, as well as the witness, Asita, who was dressed in casual clothes, were standing there, waiting quietly. They defeated the ferocious Lucarians, saved us from suffering, and took good care of us. To be honest, I have seen many mercenaries before, but they are completely different. They are like family. Cornelius' words won the approval of many people below the stage, especially the emotional women. But they are about to leave us, leave Greece. As soon as he said that, many people began to panic. If they leave, what should we do? Who will guarantee the safety of Amendalar? The tourists? Cornelius paused for a moment, and the crowd below the stage scolded. No. I would rather be destroyed by the Lucarians than be deceived by the tourists again. The selfish tourists are not allowed to enter the city of Amendalar again. Amidst the angry voices of the people, Cornelius took advantage of the situation and said loudly, "This painful lesson has taught us that we can only rely on ourselves to defend our own home. But Amendalar is very weak now, so what should we do?" Cornelius looked at the people below the stage and asked the same question again, causing them to ponder. The consul of Amendalar is dead. As a member of the Senate, I, Cornelius, am now proposing an important motion. I request to convene a citizens' assembly to vote on whether to pass it. As the number of citizens is too small now, and this matter concerns the interests of every Amendalar, I have specially requested for all Amendalars to participate in the vote. As soon as Cornelius finished speaking, before there was a commotion below the stage, the other 4 people on the stage expressed their support. Most of the women below the stage were excited to vote for the first time in their lives, so naturally, the people who opposed the motion could not make a splash. I've heard from others that although Cornelius of Amendalar is a good person, he doesn't seem to have much of an opinion on political affairs. I didn't expect him to make such a shocking move today, Archita said to the Devers, half surprised and half suspicious. After all, letting women vote to decide the major matters of the city was unprecedented in the Greek city-states. Perhaps it had only happened in ancient times. Legend had it that the women's votes played a key role in making Athens the patron goddess of Athens. The Devers smiled and did not speak. Of course, it was his idea to let the women participate in the vote. Compared to the men who valued interests more, the women were more emotional and more eager to be protected by the strong. Facing the mercenaries who saved them and treated them kindly, their choice was obvious. Since everyone has agreed to this, then my next suggestion is. Cornelius's gaze swept towards Divers and the others in the distance. Accept our benefactor, the mercenaries who saved Amendalara, as citizens of Amendalara. Then, we won't have to worry about the safety of the city anymore. The people below the stage were in an uproar. After all, it was not easy for a free person to become a citizen of a Greek city-state, let alone accepting more than 3,000 people as citizens at once. This was very rare. Greece was not Rome, after all. Chapter 103. Looking at the countless raised right arms in front of him, Archita was both happy and regretful. Devers, your wish has come true. Congratulations. The Devers breathed a sigh of relief and said sincerely, "Thank you. I also sincerely hope that the Tarentum Senate will agree to my proposal. Then we can become allies." There were a total of 1,382 people who voted on this motion. 1,076 people agreed and 306 people objected. The motion is passed. I declare. After Cornelius heard the result, his emotions were a little complicated at first, but he soon felt relieved. He shouted with all his strength, "From now on, all mercenaries are citizens of Amendalara." As soon as Cornelius finished speaking, the soldiers around the Devers cheered thunderously. The Devers were hugged by the excited officers again and again. The most common sentence they heard was, "Chief, we have a home." Hearing this, the Devers were a little dazed. Home? Unfortunately, my real home is not in this world. While the Amendalara Citizens' Assembly was being held, the Turii emissary group, still led by Ansitanos, arrived at the city gate of Amendalara. "We are the emissaries of the Turii. We want to see your leader. Please open the gate." Berks shouted at the sentries on the city wall. Before the sentries could answer, a man jumped out from the side and shouted, "Go back, Turii! Amendalara does not welcome you, go back." Upon hearing this, the emissary delegation was a little angry. Even Ansatanos, who had always been gentle, shouted angrily, "Rude mercenaries, don't think that you can do whatever you want just because you've defeated the Lucarians. Ignore the laws of the Greek city-states and forcibly occupy their cities." The man sneered. "Humph, what a selfless tone, as if you really care about the life and death of the Amendolara people. Open your eyes and look clearly. I'm an Amendolara citizen who has lived here since I was a child." Ansatanos was stunned, but Berks recognized him. After all, he was a merchant who often came to Amendolara to trade and knew many people. "It's you, Antichris? You didn't expect me to still be alive, did you?" Antichris's words were full of resentment. "Thanks to you, Turris, the Lucanians chopped off my right hand, but fortunately I survived. Most of my neighbors, my comrades in arms, are dead because of your selfish demands and compulsions to move to that accursed city of Turii, only to be ambushed by the Lucanians when they were unprepared. The suffering of Amendola is due to the Turii. From now on, the Turris are not welcome here. This is not my personal wish, but the common wish of all the surviving Amendarans." Buckos was stunned, Ansatanos was stunned, and the emissaries were stunned. They did not expect the citizens of Amendara to treat them like this. Although Amendola and the Turris were allies, there was a huge disparity in their strength. The Turris had more than 20,000 citizens, and the total population was about 100,000. Including the freedmen, there were close to 140,000, and this did not include the slaves. Amendola's population was only about 10,000 people at most. Therefore, the Turris treated Amendola more like their own city, and rarely considered the feelings of the other. When the Turris received the news that Amendola had been conquered by the Lucanians, other than expressing regret, they were also worried about whether it would threaten the northern part of the Sabari Plains. When the citizens of Amendola, who had just escaped, asked the Turris to reclaim their lost land, the Turris ignored them because they were preoccupied with defending against the Lucanians' attack. Now, when they realized how deep the resentment of the citizens of Amendola was, they were shocked beyond words. "Don't even think about asking for anything from Amendola, and Amendola will never listen to you. Did you hear the cheers?" Antichris laughed maniacally and patted the sentry's shoulder with his left hand. "The people of Amendola have voted to accept all the mercenaries as citizens of Amendola. Therefore, they did not take over Amendola by force. They have legally become citizens of Amendola. I heard that the Lucanian army that defeated the Turris twice was annihilated by the mercenaries. I think anyone who wants to invade Amendola in the future will have to have a taste of our new citizens' shields and spears first." The threat in Antichris' words made the emissaries' expressions turn ugly. As Antichris laughed, the Turris emissaries returned angrily. Antichris stopped laughing and turned to look at the sentry beside him in a good mood. When the sentry felt his hair stand on end, Antichris showed a satisfied expression and asked, "What's your name?" "Trotidus." "Where are you from?" "I'm Thessaly, from the same hometown as the leader of the Devers." "How old are you?" 28. After asking a series of questions, Antichris went straight to the point and said to the confused sentinel, "I have 2 daughters. One is 21 years old, good-looking, her husband is dead, and she has a 2-year-old son. The other is only 16 years old, and she's not engaged. Choose one to be my son-in-law. Make your choice tonight, and I'll bring you to my house to get married tomorrow." Trotidus was instantly dumbfounded. The other sentry went up to congratulate him, and one shamelessly said, "Antichris, you have 2 daughters. Why don't you let me be your other son-in-law?" The people on the city wall laughed. The Turris emissaries groaned. "Who's that Antichris?" Ansatanos asked in a low voice. "A noble of Amendola. He used to be the captain of the patrol team and the captain of the fire brigade," Buckos answered. Ansatanos replied with an "oh" and did not say anything else. "General, although the Amendorians have a problem with the Turris, I know the leader of the mercenaries, the Devers. Although he's young, He's very steady and has a good impression of the tourists. Besides, we have an employment agreement with him, so he won't be easily instigated by the Amandorians. I believe that after some time, when the Amandorians have calmed down, we can still have a good talk with them, Buckos comforted. I hope so. Ansitano's sighed. The mercenaries are now legally citizens of Amendola, and our protest is ineffective. Given the current situation, we have to go back and discuss a new strategy. Sigh. Buckos, do you know what I'm thinking? I don't know. My teacher once said, after the Greco-Persian War, Sparta was arrogant and treated its neighbors harshly and inhumanely. Therefore, the Greek city-states distanced themselves from Sparta and went to deal with the Kinder Athens, which eventually led to the formation of the Tino alliance. As Ansitanos pondered, he blamed himself painfully. Is our Talese method really too overbearing? It's not a good sign to pretend to be arrogant when we don't have powerful strength, right? After the referendum, the women and children left the square, and Cornelis asked Archita to leave because the real citizens' assembly of Amendola was about to begin. Other than the patrolling sentries on the city wall and the soldiers guarding the prisoners, there were 512 original citizens of Amendola and 2,920 newly promoted citizens, including 1,837 Devers mercenaries and 1,083 other mercenaries, in the square, totaling 3,432 citizens of Amendola. Chapter 104. The highest authority in both Athens and Amendola is the General Assembly, which allows all citizens to participate. It decides on the laws, military affairs, foreign affairs, and other important matters of the city-state. Athens has the 10 generals system, and Amendola has 2 archons, who manage the internal affairs of the city-state and serve as the commander of the army during wartime. They are elected by the General Assembly every year. Athens has a council of 500 people, and Amendola has a senate of 100 people. The members of the senate are also elected by the General Assembly every year. They propose bills and are responsible for the execution and trial of the city-state's laws. They also assist the Archon in managing the city-state, as well as ordinary foreign affairs. Originally, the election of the Archon was held in June every year. The Archon was applied for by the Archon, nominated by the Senate, and elected by the General Assembly. But now, Amendola has gone through war, and there are many things waiting to be done. They urgently need to elect an Archon to lead the people to rebuild their homeland, so they made an exception and held it today. I would like to invite the former mercenary chief Devers and the main officers to come up to the stage to discuss and list the candidates for the Archon. As soon as Cornelis finished speaking, the new citizens, former mercenaries, below the stage were getting impatient. Why are we still choosing candidates? The Archon of Amendola can only be our chief Devers. Someone shouted in the crowd, and the new citizens immediately agreed. Yes, we won't choose anyone other than the chief Devers. Only the Devers can lead us to continue creating miracles. The chief Devers is a victorious commander. With him, we don't have to worry about failure. The chief Devers will be the Archon. Devers! 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 The thousands of new citizens in the venue shouted the names of the Devers in unison. It was quite a sight. It was the first time Cornelis had encountered such a situation, and he couldn't help but panic. He immediately looked at the Devers below the stage for help. Devers smiled and said something to Assists. Assists immediately ran to the back of the square. Soon, the loud sound of a bronze horn resounded in the square. The former Devers and mercenaries immediately calmed down, and the other mercenaries gradually stopped shouting. Cornelis was secretly shocked by the Devers' strong appeal. It seemed that the Devers would definitely become the consul, so the other consul should be chosen from the original citizens of Amendola. While Cornelis was anxiously trying to think of how to speak, someone in the crowd shouted, "Brothers, although we have elected the leader of the Devers as consul, don't forget that he still has to share power with another person." Next year, a new consul will be elected. Who can be better than the leader of the Devers? Who could create more miracles than the leader of the Devers? Who else could command the battle better than the leader of the Devers? Who else is more favored by the gods than Devers? Nobody's here. Nobody's here. The new citizens shouted again. Are you willing to let a strange, incompetent person rule you? Another person shouted. No. This was exactly what the mercenaries were worried about. Brothers, think about it carefully. Is democracy really good? Think about Athens. It was once the most powerful city in Greece, but it was destroyed by a group of incompetent politicians. Think about the city-states we passed through in the Yolk-Star Ocean. They are also democracies, but their governance of the city-states is terrible. An army must listen to the command of a wise general to win a battle. If a city wants to be strong, of course, it should follow this principle. Brothers, in the past year, we have experienced many difficulties, but we have also gained a lot of knowledge. We have seen the vastness of Persia, the tyranny of Sparta, and the bullying of Turris. Do you want to enjoy freedom under a democratic system and live a life of bullying, or do you want to become strong under the leadership of the leader of the Devers? Soldiers, tell us your choice. Looking at Olivers, who was waving his arms and shouting in the crowd, the Devers nodded slightly. The Devers as king. A shout came from the crowd. Cornelis and the other 5 people on the stage, as well as the native citizens of Amyndolara, were all shocked. Cesta and Adrianx turned to look at the Devers not far away, as well as Antonios, Capus, Amintas, and the other senior officers of the mercenary army. All of them looked calm. If they were more familiar with the Devers, they would realize that the people leading the soldiers in the square were Helos, Matones, Olivers, and the other members of Helos's team. Cesta and Adrianx looked at each other and then fell silent. Following that shout, the entire square suddenly fell into a terrible silence. But soon, the new citizens also began to shout, "The Devers as king." At first, it was sparse, but in the end, it became more and more uniform and loud. Cornelis and the other 5 people looked at each other. One of the old men wanted to rush out but was held back by his left and right. In the end, he gave up. Facing the pressure of thousands of people below the stage, no one dared to summon the courage to step forward and shout, "You are wrong. Amyndolara will never allow anyone to be elected as king. The laws of Amyndolara won't allow it. The citizens of Amyndolara will never allow it." The reason they were able to live until now instead of dying in the hands of the Lucanians like the other citizens of Amyndolara was because they were not brave enough. That was also the reason why the Devers had chosen them. Most of the original citizens of Amyndolara below the stage were old, weak, sick, and disabled. They had neither the will nor the ability to fight against the mercenaries. Cornelis suddenly regretted agreeing to let the mercenaries join Amyndolara, but the current situation did not allow him to think too much. He once again looked at the Devers with pleading eyes. The Devers saw that the time was ripe. He calmly walked up to the stage. When the new citizens saw him appear on the wooden stage, they became even more excited and shouted in unison, "The Devers as king! The Devers as king! The Devers as king!" Cornelis looked at the Devers with a complicated expression and moved to the center. The Devers looked at the dense crowd below the stage. The loud voices almost squeezed his ears, but he calmly pressed his hands down. The square gradually calmed down. "Soldiers, no, I should now call you the citizens of Amyndolara. When I left Byzantium, I told my officers that I will make you citizens of the city and let you have your own land. In less than 2 months, my promise was fulfilled. You used your sweat, blood, and fearless fighting spirit to win today's rewards. This is what you deserve. Congratulations, new citizens of Amyndolara! Victory!" The new citizens below the stage cheered excitedly, and some even shed tears. "Thank you very much for your trust in me. You want to elect me as the king of Amyndolara. To me, becoming a king doesn't mean that I have the power to bully the citizens and gain benefits for myself. Instead, it means that I have a greater responsibility to let the citizens of Amandalora live a happier life. I want our city to be stronger and not be bullied by others. Although I have the confidence to do it. The Devers paused. Cornelis was so nervous that his heart almost jumped out of his throat. I still have to apologize to you. I can't be the king. As soon as he said that, the people on the stage heaved a sigh of relief, but the new citizens below the stage were in an uproar. Why? The new citizens asked.